Chapter 1348. Jun, who was alert, heard the noise outside. He walked out shirtless to find out what was going on. But he was an adult, after all, and the children were still asleep. If he hadn't woken Kong Kong up, Kong Kong would probably be sleeping soundly. Kiki didn't wake up either. Poplar Fruit opened the door and saw that his daughter was still sleeping soundly. Poplar Fruit hesitated for a moment, but still woke up the little girl who was like a sleeping beauty. After wiping her face and changing her clothes, Kiki had been dozing off in a daze, and from time to time, she wanted to go back to bed and continue sleeping. "I'm still very sleepy." Kiki pouted her small mouth and said unhappily, "The elephants outside are coming. Xian and Dajuan have already escaped." Poplar Fruit said with a smile, "Hurry up and change your clothes. Daddy will take you to see the elephants." The little girl didn't react for a moment, only to see her suddenly shake, and her eyes, which were still squinting just now, suddenly opened wide, as if they had suddenly become two bright light bulbs. Kiki instantly became energetic. She didn't hide her joy, pulled her father's hand that was wiping her face, and asked, "Is it really an elephant? Really? Daddy will still lie to you?" Poplar Fruit chuckled, rubbed his daughter's little head, and said, "It's really an elephant. Daddy hasn't seen it yet, but I heard their cries." Then, Daddy, let's hurry up, hurry up." The little girl became excited. She didn't even care to rinse her mouth, pulled her father's hand, and wanted to walk outside. "Put on your shoes. Put on your shoes." Poplar Fruit chased out, but only let the little fellow change into slippers. Kiki's thoughts at this moment had already flown to the elephants that she yearned for. In the beginning, the wild elephant experts didn't allow the children to risk coming into contact with those elephants. Even the fenced ground was not allowed to go down to the children. Poplar Fruit could only stand on top with Kiki and look down at the elephants walking slowly, not far away. The elephants seemed to be regular visitors to this camp. They obviously noticed the presence of Poplar Fruit and the others, but they were not vigilant at all. They just did what they were supposed to do. Some of them even stopped and exchanged glances with Poplar Fruit and Kiki upstairs. Looking at those eyes, Poplar Fruit suddenly felt like he was a caged animal being watched by a group of elephants. Well, this feeling was really weird, although Poplar Fruit knew it was an illusion because of the fence around the treehouse. However, Kiki was very excited. The little girl jumped around and was not afraid of breaking the treehouse. She waved at the elephant and giggled as she told her father about her discovery. "The elephant is so big. Papa, look at that elephant. It's twice as big as this one. Then they're so tall, even taller than Papa." The little girl felt that her father was already the tallest. Poplar Fruit laughed and said, "The small elephant is still an elephant baby." Just like Kiki? Kiki leaned on the railing and asked curiously, "Is its elephant Papa also protecting it?" "Yes." Poplar Fruit chatted with Kiki. Dajuan, Xian, Nua, and Kong Kong, who borrowed shoes from their friends, ran out. After getting over the fear period, the children were like Kiki, full of curiosity about the elephant herd that entered. "Be careful, don't fall down," Jun said. Hey. No, look, the elephant is waving at me." When Chi-Chi saw that her beckoning had received a response, she happily said to Nua, who had moved closer to her, "That's not a hand, that's an elephant's trunk, haha." Dajuan fully played his role as a science expert. I tell you, the last time I was here, I saw an elephant in Thailand. An elephant's trunk can roll up wood, then eat bananas. Nuayi's logic was in a mess, but Kiki and her friends listened with relish. They encountered danger early in the morning, and even now, it was only 5 o'clock. The sky had just become bright. The children were a little heartless, but the fathers still sighed. Lin Yongjian laughed humorously. Fortunately, there was Poplar Fruit keeping watch in the morning. Otherwise, we would have to sit in the tent and watch the elephants. Actually, there's still an expert helping to watch over them, Poplar Fruit said to Lin Yongjian with a smile. "And look at these elephants, they're actually very docile." The atmosphere was no longer as tense. Under the guidance of the expert, the children even went downstairs to interact with the wild elephants at a close distance. Of course, they could not get close. They looked at each other from 3 to 4 meters away. But clearly, the wild elephants were not interested in these little human beings. They shook their trunks, turned their heads, and slowly left. After all, they were wild elephants. They had their own range of activity. Now that they were full of water, it was time to continue walking into the depths of the mountains. On the other hand, the small elephant looked back reluctantly. It was looking in the direction of Kiki, who had been waving at it. "I don't want the elephants to leave," Kiki said with a pout. "They haven't agreed to be my good friends yet, but they want to go home. Their home is in the mountains." Poplar Fruit said gently, "It's rare to see them. This is also a kind of fate. Say goodbye to the elephants, okay?" "Okay." The little girl understood the feeling of homesickness. She waved at the small elephant reluctantly and said in a clear voice, "Goodbye, elephant. I'll miss you." The small elephant heard the sound and looked back, but the mother elephant in front of it turned around and raised her nose to call. In the end, the small elephant followed its mother and left. Although they had only met by chance, the 5 children, who valued friendship and righteousness, were about to cry. Poplar Fruit later heard that Dejun, who had followed his father back to the camp to pack their luggage, was still holding back his tears. He asked his father to take a picture of the place where they had spent the night. He took a picture of the flowers, grass, and even the night watchman's chair that had fallen on the ground and kept it in his memory. Kiki was the same. The little girl's eyes were also filled with tears. When Poplar Fruit was packing their luggage, she sat on the bed next to them, holding the wooden elephant that the experts had given her. She was dejected. Poplar Fruit said in amusement, "Are you still thinking about the elephant? I want to be friends with the elephant baby." Kiki pouted and sighed faintly. "We'll have a chance to see it in the future," Poplar Fruit said with a smile. "If you want to see an elephant, Daddy will take you to the zoo in the future. But then it won't be the elephant baby." Kiki still remembered how it had waved its nose at her in response. Poplar Fruit had a headache. He explained to his daughter softly, "Do you still remember what Daddy said? Meeting is fate. It has its own forest, and you have your own sky. Just remember this beautiful time. That's enough." The little girl was a little confused and didn't understand. However, her mood wasn't low for too long. Soon, the new activity made the little girl happy again. Chapter 1349. The recording did not end. Everyone returned to Meng Jinglai. The village chief asked his father and the children to sit in a row. Then, he played a documentary on the LCD TV. This was a recorded video of a local Dai resident and a wild elephant tracking team rescuing a baby elephant that was injured by a human's trap. The elephant, called Ran Ran, was about the same size as the baby elephant that Kiki saw in the morning. However, because one of its legs was injured by the trap, not only was it unable to keep up with the herd, but its wound also gradually worsened. When people saw it, the baby elephant was already on the verge of death. The emotional commentary and the bloody wound on the screen made the children's hearts clench. As for Kiki, she was even sadder. The little girl's eyes were red. She held her father's hand and almost cried. Fortunately, Ran Ran was saved. Why? Why didn't Ran Ran's father protect Ran Ran? Kiki asked in confusion. Ran Ran's pitiful appearance made the little girl's heart ache. She thought of herself. When she fell and hurt her knee, her father would take care of her in every way possible. However, Ran Ran's father abandoned her. How pitiful, because they didn't know how to save an elephant. But those experts are very powerful, right? Ran Ran should have recovered. Poplar Fruit laughed. That's right. The village chief paused the video that had already finished playing and explained to the children, under the careful care of the humans, Ran Ran eventually recovered. Moreover, I have good news to tell everyone. Because of the change from sadness to happiness, Kiki looked at the village chief with her big watery eyes. She wanted to know what the good news was. Today is Ran Ran's 15th birthday. The village chief laughed. So, let's prepare a birthday party for Ran Ran together with our fathers. Okay? Okay. The fathers and children agreed. So she was already 15 years old. Then, this video should be more than 10 years old. Poplar Fruit and the few fathers sighed in their hearts. Because of a good deed, Ran Ran was able to survive. And the villagers of the Dai family also lived happily with Ran for more than 10 years. Of course, the children did not think as much as the adults. Their attention began to be diverted by the village chief. Birthday party? Then will there be cake to eat? Kiki asked curiously. When it came to birthdays, the little girl did not feel that it was the day she was born. Her little mind was only thinking about the cake and the present. Chi-Chi's careless words immediately caused the other children's eyes to light up. Xian waved his chubby little arms and asked excitedly, Can I have a piece? Sure. The village chief smiled, but his smile was a little crafty. I want a piece too. The June followed suit. And me. Hee. Kiki said with a smile. The village chief began to announce the children's missions. The 5 children were divided into 2 groups. Big brother Kong led the youngest, Xian, and Kiki in one group. Nuo and June were in the other group. They were going to take care of Ran and her friends. Wait a minute, can I play with the elephant? Although she was taking care of him, Kiki only paid attention to the target of the mission. The little girl looked excitedly at her father and then at the village chief. She was sure that her understanding was not wrong. Of course, Poplar Fruit was telling his daughter some things to take note of, such as not being rash and listening to the instructions of her uncles and aunties, but Kiki did not listen at all. In the morning at the mountain camp, Kiki was still feeling depressed. She had a few good opportunities, but she did not get to interact with the elephant that she had been looking forward to. She did not get to ask the elephant if it was willing to be friends with her, who knew that after many difficulties, there would be a glimmer of light at the end of the tunnel. Kiki finally welcomed the moment that she had been looking forward to the most. Hearing the little girl's breathing, it became hurried. The staff had just brought baskets of carrots over when Chi-Chi, who couldn't wait any longer, pulled her teammates to stand up. She left her father behind and excitedly carried the small bamboo basket, taking the lead to look for the elephant. The children left, leaving the fathers looking at each other. Hu Jun asked, You're only taking care of the children and not us adults? Hee. Without the children around, we're all free. Lu Yi said with a heartless smile. Poplar Fruit also smiled and shook his head. After being joked around by them, his worry for his daughter lessened. A tamed elephant shouldn't be in any danger, right? The father stayed behind, but it's not without a mission, the village chief said. Indeed, the father still needed to work. After the village chief sent the children away, he came back to announce the father's mission. Make a cake for Ran. Make a cake? Everyone looked at each other. Furthermore, the 4 fathers cast their gazes on Poplar Fruit, who was the best at cooking. Poplar Fruit, do you know how to make cake? Poplar Fruit spread his hands and said with a bitter smile, I know 6 out of the 7 orifices, but I don't know anything. Actually, Poplar Fruit knew the process of making a cake. However, just like making noodles, he really did not have the interest or hobby to study how to make a cake. But was the program team really so thoughtless? When they arrived at their open-air kitchen, the fathers laughed. It turned out that the so-called cake was just for them to take all kinds of fruits and put them in the shape of a cake. That's true. How could an elephant like to eat butter and bread? I'm afraid Xian and the others will be disappointed. When they come back later, they'll say, where's our cake? Lu Yi said jokingly. He was always able to grasp the topic of conversation between the fathers very well. Just as the fathers were thinking about how to arrange bananas, mangoes, coconuts, and other fruits into the shape of a cake, the children had already arrived beside the elephant. There are so many elephants. Kiki did not walk in front because Xian shouted that the bamboo basket he was carrying was too heavy and could not be lifted at all. Thus, Kiki stopped. Of course, the first to lend a helping hand was Kong. He extended a hand and helped Xian carry half of the bamboo basket, while Kiki ran to the other side and helped Kong carry his basket. The 3 children helped each other and arrived in front of the elephant. I'm scared. When Xian saw such a huge creature standing there like a monster, she immediately cowered. This was different from what he saw in the treehouse. After all, at that time, he was far away and looked down at it from above. He did not feel the pressure at all. Don't be afraid, Xian. It's okay. Big sister will protect you. Kiki stepped forward and stood bravely in front of Xian Xian. Of course, the elephant in front of them did not care. It stood naively beside its keeper, its huge ears gently flapping. It was very happy and at ease. "It looks like Ran Ran," Kong Kong suddenly exclaimed. Chapter 1350. Ran Ran, are you Ran Ran? Hearing Big Brother Kong Kong's words, Chi-Chi curiously raised her head and looked at the elephant's big eyes. Unlike the other elephants, this one was obviously bigger and had reached the age of maturity. It looked at the human girl in front of it meekly. Although there was no distinction between beauty and ugliness in the eyes of elephants, it could clearly feel the gentleness and kindness emanating from Kiki. "It must be Ran Ran. Look at his leg. That's the wound from before." Kong Kong pointed at the elephant and said, there really was a deep scar. Although it had been repaired over the years, it was as if it had become a scar on the body. However, because the injury was too serious, the scar couldn't completely heal and dissipate. "Then is it healed?" Xian Xian asked in a childish voice. "It healed a long time ago. How could it not be healed after 10 years? Kong Kong said like an old man. His tone was the same as when he was woken up in the morning, pretending to be an old lady. "Ran Ran, you're so pitiful." Kiki reached out her hand and touched Ran Ran's trunk. Ran Ran lifted its trunk and gently patted Kiki's head. The little girl was wearing a round hat, but she could still feel it clearly. She giggled and said, "Aya, it's so itchy." Kiki took out a carrot from her bamboo basket. Under the guidance of the uncle, she placed it under the elephant's trunk. Ran Ran's long trunk agilely stretched over, and the tip of the trunk cleverly picked up the carrot and put it into its mouth. Although Ran Ran's tusks were very long and sharp, its gentle personality didn't make it that scary. Seeing that Chi-Chi and Ran Ran were having so much fun, Kong Kong and Xian Xian couldn't help but move forward, especially Xian Xian. He felt that with his sister as a precedent, the elephant shouldn't be as scary as he imagined, so he tried to feed Ran Ran a banana. After playing with Ran Ran for a while, Kiki and Kong Kong still had to complete their task. They didn't need to take care of Ran Ran, but its good friend Ming Ming. Kiki had feelings for Ran Ran. Although Ran Ran didn't answer when she asked if it was willing to be her friend. How could it answer? Elephants can't talk. Ran Ran's intimate actions still gave Kiki a satisfied response. "Ran Ran, let's go take care of your good friend Ming Ming first. Then, I'll come back to play with you, okay?" Chi-Chi pulled Ran Ran's elephant trunk and patted it gently, as if she was comforting gold. She said softly. Of course, Ran Ran wouldn't nod and say yes, but it seemed to understand human nature. Just as Kiki was about to pick up the bamboo basket and walk to Ming Ming, Ran Ran suddenly stretched out its trunk and grabbed the handle of the basket easily. In other people's eyes, it seemed that Ran Ran wanted to rob Kiki of her carrots. However, Kiki could magically feel Ran Ran's intention. She was surprised at first, then she giggled and said, "Ran Ran, are you going to help me take it?" Ran Ran slowly walked and followed Kiki. It didn't say anything, but its intention was obvious. A huge monster and a small girl. The contrast was strong, but the harmony was admirable. If an example had to be given, this was similar to Hayao Miyazaki's animation Totoro. When they arrived at Ming Ming's place, Xian Xian and Kong Kong were already busy feeding the elephant called Ming Ming. Ming Ming was smaller than Ran Ran, but it was very greedy. Its long trunk was curled up like a snake. The two boys hurriedly stuffed a lot of carrots into it. Kiki came over at this time. Behind her was Ran Ran, who was helping to carry the bamboo basket. The little girl jumped and took the bamboo basket. She patted Ran Ran's nose and said, "Thank you, Ran Ran. I'm going to do a mission." Kiki's mood at this moment was like the lazy white clouds in the sky. It was bright and beautiful. If a group of elegant white cranes were added, it could play a happy song. She excitedly added bricks and tiles to the carrot mountain in Ming Ming's nose with Xian Xian and the others. Suddenly, Kiki felt her waist was gently bumped. She looked back and saw Ran Ran retracting its long nose. "You did something bad and still want to pretend that nothing happened." "I know it's you," Kiki giggled. "Ran Ran is so naughty." Ong, Ran Ran raised its nose and softly called out, "Do you want to eat too?" Kiki understood Ran Ran's meaning. This feeling was very mysterious, but Kiki understood. She scratched her head, picked up a carrot, and handed it to Ran Ran. Ran Ran rolled it up and stuffed it into her mouth. "Is it delicious?" Kiki giggled and asked. Ran Ran didn't say anything. She just looked at Kiki. Kiki translated Ran Ran's meaning. "You think it's delicious and still want to eat, right? Hee hee, but you haven't said thank you yet." The Dai uncle who followed Ran Ran looked at Kiki in surprise. He knew that Ran Ran was gentle, but it was rare to see someone like Kiki who could play with Ran Ran so freely. After eating the delicious carrots, Xian Xian and Kong Kong took Ming Ming for a walk. Kiki also followed behind with Ran Ran. Now, she was like Ran Ran's exclusive beast tamer. Without the Dai uncle's order, Kiki could move Ran Ran's cumbersome body with just a gesture. Of course, Kiki didn't put herself in the position of a high and mighty beast tamer. In her view, Ran Ran was her good friend, just like Xian Xian and the others. Good friends were equal and should play together happily. Ran Ran liked Kiki very much. The audience behind the camera could see this. When they were walking, Ran Ran suddenly used its trunk to rub Kiki's back. This time, the Dai uncle played his role. He smiled and said, "Kiki, Ran Ran wants you to sit on its back." In other words, he wanted Kiki to ride the elephant. But I can't," Kiki said awkwardly. Ran Ran stretched out her trunk and was about to wrap it around Kiki's waist. The Dai uncle was shocked. "My daughter is weak. Who knows if Ran Ran can control her strength well?" He hurriedly waved his hand and said, Let me help you up." With the help of the Dai uncle, Kiki successfully got on Ran Ran's back. The program crew was still a little worried and motioned for Ran Ran to continue walking. They stood in place, afraid that Kiki would be bumped off. Whether it was serious or not, if she was accidentally stepped on by the elephant, the consequences would be the same as being run over by a truck. However, Kiki was very happy. She sat firmly on Ran Ran's back and looked around. She happily patted Ran Ran and said, "Ran Ran, you've grown so tall. You're amazing. I think I've become taller too." Ran Ran didn't know if it understood Kiki's praise or not, but raised its trunk and barked happily. Chapter 1351. There was a reason why Xiao Han spent more ink on the elephants. After Poplar Fruit and the other forefathers finished designing the fruit cake, they could not hold back their worry and longing for their children. They all walked over to see how the children had completed their task. Ha! Hee hee! From afar, the fathers could hear the laughter of their children. Over there, it wasn't just the little ones, it wasn't just the big guys. There was also the splashing of water and the joy that filled the sky. Kong Kong and the rest were bathing the elephants. The water pipes were in the hands of the children. They sprayed the water out and let Ran Ran and the other elephants take a comfortable cold bath. It was already midsummer, especially in a hot place like Cayenne. When the cold water sprayed in the air, not only did the elephants feel comfortable, the surrounding air also seemed to have become much cooler. The elephants were really docile. Wong Wong, who was on Nuo E and June's side, even lay down and let Nuo E and the others, who were not tall enough, help bathe themselves with brushes. However, the elephant's body was too dirty. He only used a brush to brush it twice. The brush turned completely black, and the bristles were mixed with all kinds of grass and soil. It was not just black, but also a kind of nausea that made the children feel uncomfortable. "Hey, I don't want to brush it anymore." He went on strike. On this side, Poplar Fruit found his daughter. She was holding a water pipe and playing with Ran Ran. When she saw her father, she could not wait to introduce her new friend to her father. Although Ran Ran was 14 years old, she was still a little mischievous. When Kiki was not paying attention, she secretly stretched out her long nose and sucked some water from the water pipe. Then, she suddenly sprayed it at Poplar Fruit. Wah! Poplar Fruit did not know whether to laugh or cry as he reached out to block the water droplets that filled the sky. However, he could not block it. Most of his clothes were wet, but he looked at this ill-fated elephant and could not do anything. He could only helplessly stare at this troublemaker. Ran Ran, You're too bad. How can you sneak attack? Kiki was also sprayed a little. The little girl put her hands on her waist and said angrily, with her arms akimbo, the hose in her hand tilted and sprayed directly at her father beside her. Poplar Fruit dodged awkwardly. He really didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Not only was he tricked by the elephant, but he was also sprayed with water by his daughter. Everything below his knees was drenched. But Kiki acted as if she didn't hear it. She held the water pipe and played with Ran. In order to let Kiki bathe the tall Ran, Poplar Fruit even picked up the little fellow and let Kiki sit on his neck. Then he held the hose and sprayed wherever Kiki pointed the brush at. Although it wouldn't be long before Ran rolled around in the mud again and got herself dirty, before the birthday party, Ran had washed up and felt refreshed. She raised her nose comfortably and called out. The birthday party was about to start. Ran put on the golden cardboard crown and walked towards the party venue. Poplar Fruit held Kiki's hand, and the other fathers and children followed behind Ran. Kiki originally wanted to sit on Ran's back, but Poplar Fruit didn't let her. Today is Ran's birthday, so let's not make Ran so tired, okay? Kiki's attention was quickly attracted by the beautifully decorated party venue. The other children were the same. They all shouted, "It's so beautiful!" Wasn't it? The lawn was so big that it looked like a lawn in a park. The cake made by the fathers was placed in the middle. The real attraction was the arches placed on the lawn. The arches were wrapped with white fairy flowers, and it just so happened that the party could be held on the lawn. It looks like a wedding place. Nuayi's words hit the nail on the head, and everyone nodded in agreement. The arches with flower decorations really looked like Western wedding decorations. The main guests entered the venue, and the fathers and children stood opposite the village chief and Ran. The village chief then started the birthday party. Of course, the village chief still had to say a few words. Let me introduce everyone. The village chief pulled out the die uncle who had always been by Ran's side. It turned out that his surname was Xiong, because he and the others had saved Ran and took care of Ran for 10 years. Everyone affectionately called him Father Xiong. Father Xiong told everyone that today was not only Ran's 10th birthday, but it was also an important day for Ran to leave the Dai family's village and return to nature. Wait, everyone was a little confused. Wasn't it supposed to be a happy and joyous occasion? Why was there such a piece of news? Are we really leaving? Jun asked. Father Xiong nodded and said, yes, nature is Ran's home. Now that Ran is an adult and healthy, it's time for her to return to the forest and find her nature. When are we leaving? Now, Jun asked. He was now the calmest person among his father and children. As for the others, even Poplar Fruit found it difficult to accept such an arrangement. Yes, we'll leave after eating the cake, Father Xiong said. Poplar Fruit suddenly felt the back of his hand wet, and water droplets dripped down. He turned his head and saw Kiki raising her hand to wipe her tears with the back of her father's hand. I don't want Ran to leave. Kiki felt terrible. She had just met an elephant who was willing to be good friends with her. But in the end, she had to leave after playing with it for a few hours. Kiki, you have to understand that Ran has grown up. She needs to go to the forest to find her own happiness. Poplar Fruit squatted down and said softly to his daughter, just like you, when you grow up and have a boyfriend, you will also have to leave your father. I don't want to. I don't want to grow up. I don't want to leave Papa. Kiki pouted and said with tears in her eyes. Suddenly, a long nose reached over and gently touched Kiki's waist. She looked up and saw Ran looking at her with her big eyes full of emotions. It seemed to be persuading Kiki not to cry, and also seemed to be expressing its reluctance to leave. However, this made Kiki cry even more sadly. I still want to play with Ran. Poplar Fruit could only continue comforting her. It's okay. Daddy asked Uncle to take many photos of you and Ran. If you miss Ran in the future, you can see her in the photos. Kiki's crying stopped. She sobbed and asked, is Ran going to find her Papa and Mama Ma? The little girl remembered the video she had watched previously. Yes, Maybe we should give Ran some understanding and give her the courage and blessings to return to nature, okay? Poplar Fruit said with a smile. Kiki buried her head in her father's arms. She had stopped crying, but it was difficult to make her happy. She still felt terrible in her heart. Chapter 1352. All good things must come to an end. Although Kiki was reluctant to part with her new friend Ran, she still held back her tears. Together with Nua, and the others, they fed Ran many of its favorite fruits. Unlike Chi-Chi, although Dajuan and Kong Kong were more or less reluctant to part with their father and asked him all sorts of questions, they didn't cry because of this matter like Chi-Chi. Of course, Xian and Nua, he did not need to be mentioned. They did not understand the complicated feelings of parting, not to mention the friendship between humans and animals. Therefore, they only picked the fruits they liked to eat and fed them to Ran. Of course, they secretly ate some themselves. What was interesting was that although the cake was different from what they had imagined, none of the children remembered it because they had had too much fun with the elephants just now. Otherwise, if the cake was gone, they would definitely pester the village chief and father to get it back. The laughter of the birthday party was more than the sadness, but behind the laughter, there was endless sadness. After all, they still had to part, and it was time to part. Father Bear held Ran's hand and walked in front, while the fathers walked behind with the children. They came to the small path up the mountain from the village. The path was winding and weeds intersected, but at the end was the endless Zaidanbana forest. That was where Ran would live and breed in the future. Yes, Ran had already grown up. It was time to enter the forest and find its mother elephant. Poplar Fruit placed his daughter on his neck and let her say goodbye to Ran. The little girl didn't burst into tears at this moment. Although sparkling and translucent tears were swirling in her eyes, she endured it because her father had told her to support and encourage Ran. After all, the forest was Ran's home. Ran was also reluctant to part. It looked at Kiki and Father Bear, who had taken care of it for 10 years. It also looked at the village it had lived in for 10 years. Elephants understood humans, and so did Ran. When it was time to part, it also seemed to have mixed feelings. It's crying, June said in surprise. Yes, tears seeped out of Ran's eyes. One had to know that elephants did not cry easily. Ran suddenly barked. He closed his eyes and opened them again. His long nose curled towards Daddy Bear beside him, like a human's arm. He wanted to hug Daddy Bear. Then it was Kiki's turn. She didn't roll up Kiki. Instead, she lifted her nose and patted Kiki's shoulder like a human's palm. Kiki finally couldn't hold back her tears any longer. She reached out to pull Ran's nose, but in the end, she only lightly touched it. It was as if two people were high-fiving each other. However, no one knew what kind of agreement they had reached. In the end, Ran left. Kiki watched through her teary eyes as Papa Xiong led Ran into the mountain step by step. In the end, Ran didn't look back and walked into the boundless forest. The fourth journey had come to an end. After the game, the father and the children went home one after another. They went back to the place where they lived the day before. Of course, they weren't going to stay there tonight, so they had to go back and pack up their unpacked luggage. They were going to take the production crew's car back to Kunming overnight. From there, they would take a plane back to their respective homes. Poplar Fruit did the same. He took Kiki back to take a shower first. When he was bathing Ran just now, he was wet and covered in a lot of mud. He would feel uncomfortable if he didn't take a shower and change his clothes. After the little girl took a shower, her emotions stabilized. After all, she wasn't Lin Daiyu. Although she was sad, she maintained an optimistic attitude. She was overjoyed at the thought of going home. She chattered about going home, saying that she wanted to go home and show Ma the photos of the past few days. I'll take a shower first. Poplar Fruit couldn't be bothered to listen to his daughter's nagging. He smiled and said, "Sit here obediently and wait for Daddy. Don't run around. Otherwise, I'll leave you here later and not bring you home." Papa, you're scaring me." Kiki jumped around and laughed. The little girl didn't fall for her father's tricks. She shook her long hair that had just been washed. It was still a little wet and couldn't be dried. It was very uncomfortable. She had to let it dry as soon as possible. Poplar Fruit had only been in for 2 minutes when Kiki knocked on the door. She said softly, "Papa, Papa, I want to say goodbye to the Nuo family's peacock." The little girl's memory was really good. She could still remember the peacock when she first came to Mengjing. It was probably because it stimulated Kiki's emotions, right? But unfortunately, Poplar Fruit had just taken off his clothes, soaped up, and was about to wash his hair. Moreover, he hadn't bathed for the whole day yesterday and was sticky. Poplar Fruit couldn't come out like this. He shouted, "Wait a minute. Wait for Daddy to take a shower. Then I'll take you there." "No." Chi-Chi giggled. "Uncle Lou, the photographer, said he can take me there." The cameraman who was following them was also packing his luggage. He didn't need to take any more pictures, but when he heard that Kiki was going to confess to the peacock, he felt that it should be good material. So he turned on his camera and prepared to follow them. After hearing the cameraman's explanation, Poplar Fruit was relieved. With the cameraman following them, Poplar Fruit was still very relieved. After all, this cameraman was in charge of him. When Kiki received the mission card for her birthday, it was also this cameraman who took pictures. "Come back quickly. Daddy is packing and waiting for you to come back," Poplar Fruit shouted. "Okay." The little girl's voice was crisp and clear. She ran off. When Poplar Fruit came out, Kiki had already left with the cameraman and was not back yet. So, Poplar Fruit followed his original plan of packing. He put Kiki's and his dirty clothes into separate bags and stuffed them into suitcases. He was going to pack them when he got back to Guangzhou. But when he finished packing, Kiki was still not back. Poplar Fruit couldn't help but frown. Suddenly, he felt a little uneasy. It was as if the mysterious premonition that had been haunting him for the past few days had resurfaced. "What's going on? Why isn't she back yet?" Poplar Fruit didn't know why, but the usually calm and composed man became very irritated. He paced a few steps in the building and couldn't help but walk out. Poplar Fruit walked towards Lu Ye's room number 1. Kiki should still be there. Poplar Fruit made up his mind. When he saw Kiki later, he would definitely teach her a lesson. Poplar Fruit was troubled by all kinds of strange feelings. His breathing became a little rapid, and his thoughts started to change. Why is this happening? Suddenly, his pupils shrank. He saw a person lying down on a dark village road. Chapter 1353. Poplar Fruit was very familiar with the person on the ground. He was the cameraman who accompanied Kiki to bid farewell to Peacock. What happened? What happened? Yang mind was in a daze. He staggered back 2 steps and then rushed forward without a care. He had already realized something, but he didn't dare to believe it, so he ran 2 steps before stopping. He bit his lip to clear his head. When he relaxed his teeth, a deep imprint was left on his lips. Something must have happened. Yang turned back and squatted down to check on the photographer, Old Lou. Old Lou was injured. He was hit in the forehead with a stick. He was still alive, but fainted. His breathing was normal. Of course, it was unknown whether he had a concussion or not. However, Poplar Fruit could see a long swollen mark on Ol Lou's arm. It was very long and should have been caused by the stick. It was similar to the one on his forehead. What Yang Guo was thinking about wasn't the damage caused by the staff, but the reason for the staff's appearance. Actually, Poplar Fruit, who had reached the level of a grandmaster, was very good at simulating movements. His brain spun quickly, and he immediately constructed the scene at that time. That person must have launched a sneak attack from behind, but Old Lou discovered it by accident. Lou hurriedly raised his arm to block the attack. In pain, the camera fell to the ground. After all, Lou was not a martial arts expert. He was just a normal person. Even though he managed to dodge the first hit, he could not dodge the second. The second hit landed on his forehead and knocked him out. This was definitely premeditated. Poplar Fruit took a deep breath and forced himself to calm down. He needed to think, to consider all the details that he had seen. Lou was injured, the camera was missing. Kiki should have been in an accident as well. Poplar Fruit's head was spinning, but he was good at multitasking. One of his thoughts represented his emotions, but the other represented his intelligence. What were they trying to do? The camera was stolen because they did not want to expose themselves. Poplar Fruit would not be able to track them down. However, Lu must have seen the attacker. As long as Lu woke up, there would be a clue. In the midst of the chaos, Yangguo woke up in a daze, only to find that she was being supported to sit on a chair. It was the director. The program crew seemed to be a mess. Producer Xie was there with a gloomy face, shouting and calling for the program crew to run around, trying to find the missing Chi-Chi. Yes, even though Poplar Fruit was thinking, he could not control his body. When the crew found him, Poplar Fruit was slumped beside Lu. Someone knew what had happened because Lu was not the only cameraman in Poplar Fruit's house. Producer Xie asked the other crew members and found out that Lu had accompanied Kiki to room 1 and that Poplar Fruit had gone out to look for her. Chaos. This was the current situation of the production crew. Poplar Fruit's thoughts were the same. It was a big deal that a child involved in the filming had an accident. It was enough to drown the production crew of "Where are we going, Dad?" in the saliva of the people. Producer Xie's first reaction was to send someone to look for her. He had a glimmer of hope in his heart. Maybe Kiki was just being naughty. It's good that she's back. It's good that she's back. However, how could they find her? The village had been turned upside down, but the little girl's shadow was nowhere to be found. There was also Lu. No one believed that the person who attacked Lu was just trying to steal a camera. However, why was Kiki the victim? The production crew was already in a mess. Some were blaming each other, while others were arguing and coming up with ideas. At this time, Poplar Fruit regained his senses. His face was tense as he pushed away the other fathers and children who rushed over to comfort him. He looked straight at Producer Xie and said in a hoarse voice, "Teacher Xie, we have to call the police on this matter." Poplar Fruit had a strange feeling in his heart. He felt that this matter was not normal. Now, Poplar Fruit believed in his feelings because he had just suffered a setback. If he had not ignored his previous premonition and taken it too lightly, Kiki would not have suddenly disappeared. Call the police? No, it can't be made public. The director, assistant director, and other key personnel of the production crew next to him exclaimed and subconsciously shook their heads. One had to know that if this matter was blown up and spread, it would be difficult for the production crew to bear the impact of such a huge public opinion. After the first and second episodes of the show were broadcast, except for a large number of fans who were cheering on the internet, the voices of criticism did not decrease at all. A simple example was the scene of Xian playing with the dog, which caused a lot of controversy. The audience felt that bringing the child to such a dangerous place was completely putting the child's safety on a show. Although the production crew did some public relations and said that they actually had protective measures, such as having an assistant by their side all the time to act as a human shield. This was the truth, but the audience did not believe it. Moreover, netizens were particularly easy to provoke by rumors. If Kiki's whereabouts were exposed now, the production crew would definitely be at the forefront of the storm. Perhaps their reputation would plummet from then on, and they could forget about having a future. This was a concern from their point of view. But for Poplar Fruit, nothing was more important than his daughter's safety. He looked at Producer Xie with a gloomy face and said stiffly, "Teacher Xie, you know that if anything happens to my daughter, you can't hide it." How could they hide it? Not to mention the reporters and paparazzi everywhere. Even if they hid, what if Kiki disappeared later on in the show? One had to know that Kiki was not an insignificant character. If this show was counted as a movie, then Kiki was the female lead, and the only female lead. Who dared to say that the show could easily lose her? And then the audience, who had completely fallen in love with this clever and cute girl after 2 episodes of the show, would be indifferent. Poplar Fruit calmed down first. Zhou Shimin pulled Poplar Fruit's arm and said worriedly, "Making a scene won't solve the problem. Let's discuss the countermeasures." Poplar Fruit also knew that making a scene wouldn't solve the problem, but could the production crew, who only knew how to look at the camera, find Kiki? That was impossible. He took a deep breath and looked at Producer Xie, who was in a difficult position, and said, "Call Kaiyun's public security department for help. I'm very familiar with them, and they can minimize the impact." He couldn't drag this on. Yonghua knew that there was a golden 24-hour rescue in other countries. He didn't dare to drag this on. He didn't know what would happen to Chi-Chi if she fell into the hands of those criminals. Chapter 1354. Where was Kiki? Was she okay? Was she hurt? Thinking of these questions, Poplar Fruit felt extremely uncomfortable. He even thought in a bad direction. Every time such chaotic thoughts appeared, Poplar Fruit's hands could not help but tremble. It was not a trembling of fear, but of anger. Who was it? Who was it that dared to touch my daughter? Don't let me find out, or I'll tear you apart. Poplar Fruit's emotions were on the verge of collapse. To be precise, his emotional thinking was on the verge of losing control, but he did not lose control because his rational thinking took over his body. So what everyone saw was a Poplar Fruit who was abnormally calm in the face of trouble. He was so calm that it was scary. Lu Yi, Wu Jun, and Lin Yongjian took the children and boarded the plane to leave. Poplar Fruit did not stop them. After all, they were big celebrities and had their own itineraries. Even Zhou Shimin, who wanted to stay behind to accompany Poplar Fruit, was persuaded by Poplar Fruit to go home. Zhou Shimin and the others' concern for Poplar Fruit was remembered by Poplar Fruit, but it was useless for them to stay. The program team temporarily stayed behind. After the initial chaos, they understood the seriousness of the matter and fully cooperated with Poplar Fruit to find Kiki as soon as possible. Poplar Fruit's phone call was not without results. Cayenne Province's Public Security Bureau Chief, Yin Wanxiong, was still in his position. After he received Poplar Fruit's call, he immediately gave instructions to Shidon Bana's Public Security Bureau to quickly send police to help find and solve the case. So, in less than 2 hours, Shidon Bana's criminal police unit had Meng Jinglai under control. There were police officers and police dogs everywhere. They were even prepared to mobilize the local experienced forest police to search the mountains. Not only that, Yin Wanxiong would personally come and oversee the battle. Why was he so concerned? This had little to do with his personal relationship with Poplar Fruit. The real reason was still Poplar Fruit. And Where Are We Going, Dad? There was no need to introduce how popular Where Are We Going, Dad? was. Almost everyone in the country had heard of the show, and the filming locations for the first 2 seasons had become popular tourist attractions. Otherwise, why would Shidon Bana be so thick-skinned as to beg them to do a show? As for the guests of Where Are You Going, Daddy? Something had happened to them at Kai Yun and Shidon. If news of this spread out, what would others think of this matter? Not to mention the production team. Even the local tourism safety issues were being debated over and over again. If everyone felt that Shidon Bana and Kaiyun were not safe, then who would dare to travel to Kaiyun? It must be known that Kaiyun Province was not an economic province like Guangdong Province. The tourism economy occupied an important part of the province's GDP. Didn't you see that last year's riots eased the tourism in Kaiyun Province for a long time until the National Day Golden Week, before it recovered? When it came to the terrorist incident, Yonghua was definitely involved. As the hero of the last terrorist case, as one of this year's top 10 people who touched China, Yonghua had once again encountered a nasty incident in Kaiyun Province. If such an incident were to break out, if Kaiyun Province did not put in any effort to help resolve it, how would the people of the country view Kaiyun Province? Therefore, with the instructions of the Kaiyun Public Security Department, the criminal police in Shidon Bana took action. However, after searching for a long time, they could not find any clues within a few kilometers. It was a bit like after the gangster attacked Old Lu. He quickly disappeared with Kiki. Yes, Old Lu. Just as Poplar Fruit was holding his mobile phone, silent and tangled about how to tell Fong Bei about his situation. This matter could not be hidden anymore. It would definitely be breaking news the next day, but he really did not know how to say it. Suddenly, a staff member of the production team ran over in surprise and said to Poplar Fruit, "Teacher Yang." Old Lu woke up. Standing in the darkness outside the house, the tall figure suddenly turned around, and a pair of eyes that were still sharp and terrifying against the light blinked at the staff member. At that moment, the staff member actually felt a sense of suffocation, as if he was being stared at by a fierce tiger deep in the mountains. However, Poplar Fruit quickly hid the ruthlessness in his heart. When the staff member looked again, he could only see a man who was still gentle and reserved. He thought that his eyes were playing tricks on him. Let's go. Let's go and take a look, Poplar Fruit said softly. Although he restrained his anger, Poplar Fruit still felt like he was 1,000 miles away. When they arrived at Meng Jinglai's infirmary, old Lu, whose head was bandaged, was lying there, being examined by the nurse. He had been unconscious for more than 3 hours, but fortunately, he did not have a concussion. Teacher Yang, although he was older than Poplar Fruit, old Lu still respectfully addressed Poplar Fruit as Teacher Yang. When he saw Poplar Fruit come in, he struggled to get up and said apologetically, "I'm sorry, I didn't fulfill my responsibility to take care of her." After he woke up, someone told him the general situation. Old Lu did not dare to face Poplar Fruit. He wished he could find a hole in the ground to hide in. It was all his fault. Why did he volunteer to take Kiki out without her father's company? Poplar Fruit reached out and held old Lu down. He sighed and said softly, "Old Lu, I don't blame you. This happened too strangely, too suddenly. It's not your fault." He looked into old Lu's eyes and said seriously, "When I found you, the camera was still stolen. But I believe you should have seen the person who took Kiki away. It was when you were blocking." Poplar Fruit raised his hand and made a blocking gesture. Then, he pointed at old Lu's injured arm. He looked at old Lu expectantly and said, "Old Lu, I need you. Can you recall what that person looked like?" 3 hours had passed. Although the Shidong Bana police were searching, they did not find any clues. Perhaps there was still a chance if they continued to search. But Poplar Fruit felt that the longer they delayed, the more difficult it was to predict Kiki's safety. His daughter had not eaten dinner yet. Would she be hungry now? She just took a shower and did not wear a coat. Would she catch a cold at night? Thinking of all this, Poplar Fruit's heart ached as if it was being torn apart. Yes, it could not be delayed any longer. Currently, the most promising person was old Lu. He was the only one who had seen the criminal. It was very likely that they could find a breakthrough from him. Old Lu did not have a concussion, but he was hit in the head with a stick. Now his head was splitting. But he gritted his teeth and tried hard to recall the memory of that moment. It was all his fault. Thinking of the kind and lovely girl, old Lu was full of guilt. He wanted to make up for it. Suddenly, old Lu's mind seemed to have a flash of light. He desperately tried to grasp and grasp. Suddenly, his eyes widened and he shouted, "I know, it's him." Chapter 1355. I know it's him. Old Lu's words were like a shooting star across the night sky, making Poplar Fruit excited. He was excited. Yes, I guess right. Old Lu must have seen the guy's face. It was as if he had grabbed onto a life-saving straw. He was so excited that he wanted to walk forward, but the captain of the Zaidan Public Security Bureau was even more excited than him. He suddenly jumped out and asked, "Mr. Lu, do you know the criminal who committed the crime? Is he a staff member of the program?" "No, he's not from our program." Old Lu waved his hand, but looked at Poplar Fruit and said, "Mr. Yang, do you remember the person we met in the mountains yesterday?" "The person we met in the mountains?" Old Lu's description was not very clear, but Poplar Fruit's pupils shrank slightly. He asked sternly, "The person who suddenly appeared in front of us and asked for directions? Did he kidnap Kiki?" Old Lu said seriously, "Yes. It's most likely him. At that time, I thought he looked familiar, but I was immediately stunned. But now, the more I think about it, the more I realize that he looks like that person. He just changed into black clothes." "Were you also recording the program yesterday?" Although the captain of the criminal police unit did not know much about it, he quickly sorted out the messy and complicated relationships among them. He immediately grasped the main point. "Then, can we get the image of that person by looking at the content recorded before?" Suddenly, a passageway like a highway was placed in front of everyone. They were like headless flies, bumping around for more than 3 hours, and finally found a clue. "Yes, police comrade, we have copies of all the videos recorded that day. We can get them for you right away." Producer Xie had been holding back for a long time and finally had a chance to show off. Poplar Fruit was frighteningly calm at this time. He nodded and said, "But we have 5 cameras and 5 motion cameras pinned to our chests. There must be several that can take a clear and complete picture of him." There was one thing that Poplar Fruit didn't say. Even without the camera, he could have drawn the villager with the help of the Public Security Bureau sketch expert. After all, his memory was as accurate as a hard drive. It was almost effortless to find the criminal's appearance from the footage. With the help of so many cameras, if there was time, they could even create a 3D portrait of the criminal from all angles. Of course, their time was very precious. The criminal police team quickly selected the clearest photo and distributed it, so that the Shidan Bana city wanted this person. In the end, in less than 10 minutes, there was a new clue. It was actually provided by the villagers from Mengjing. When they saw the photo in the hands of the criminal police, they exclaimed, "Isn't this Xiao Wu, Mr. Ruan's son?" Ruan Laofa's name was Ruan Xinfa. He was also a Dai, so the villagers were used to calling him Ruan Laofa. Mr. Ruan had passed away a month ago. Xiao Wu was his 5th son. No one remembered his name because he had not learned well since he was young. He spent every day with some shady people. Later on, he heard that he went to Myanmar to mingle in the underworld. Because of Ruan Laofa's death, he specially came back to visit his family. It was actually a villager. He even came back from Myanmar. The criminal police suddenly became alert. They immediately rushed over and searched the Ruan family, but they didn't find anything. There were police everywhere in Mengjing, so why would they stay there and wait for you to catch them? However, the Ruan family showed a very subtle attitude. It took an hour for the criminal police to interrogate them and find out the reason. It turned out that the Ruan family's relationship with Ruan Xiao Wu wasn't good. What else could it be? It must be the family property. The Ruan family had 5 children. The rest were farmers or businessmen. Only Ruan Xiao Wu didn't learn well. He went to Myanmar more than 10 years ago. Then, except for a few communications a year, he never came back. In the end, when Mr. Ruan died, he came back. Didn't he want to divide the Ruan family property? Because of Ruan Xiao Wu's unfilial behavior, Mr. Ruan didn't give him any property in his will. Although the 4 brothers were dutiful, they weren't stupid. Who would be willing to divide the family property? Mengjinglai was an important tourist attraction in Shidan Bana. Running a business here was a good thing to make 100 profits. The 4 brothers were already tight with the property. Who would be willing to have Ruan Xiao Wu, who had never stayed at home, come back and get a share? Well, regardless of these people's property disputes, Ruan Xiao Wu came back a few days ago after he came back once last month. He didn't make a big fuss about dividing the property. Instead, he stayed in a low-key way, saying that he was going to watch the 7th day for his father. After the day passed, he would return to Myanmar. This made the criminal police feel very strange. Was this a case of kidnapping hostages for ransom because the property wasn't going well? However, the clues that surfaced were very strange. Ruan Xiao didn't make a fuss, but the 4 brothers of the Ruan family were very resistant. That means there's something fishy. Finally, a person beside Yin Wanxiong, the head of the Kaiyun Public Security Department, said seriously. He was the most famous case-solving expert in Kaiyun Province. This time, Yin Wanxiong brought him over to quickly find clues to solve the case. Poplar Fruit also felt that it wasn't that simple, but he couldn't tell why. Administrator Zong pointed to Ruan Xiao Wu's photo on the blackboard and said, "Let's assume that Ruan Xiao Wu learned that Dad's program crew was coming over to film a month ago." From then on, he had the idea of committing a crime. Then, after Dad's crew confirmed that they were coming, he came back to Mengjing. This time coincided with the arrival of Poplar Fruit. In addition, from the confession, it can be seen that Ruan Xiao Wu is very low-key. Why is he low-key? It's because he goes out early and returns late every day. No one knows his whereabouts. Is this what a person who wants to observe mourning for his father would do? I don't believe it. And Ruan Xiao Wu happened to appear on the route that Poplar Fruit and the others were exploring. He didn't make a move on other children who were easier and more famous. Instead, he deliberately targeted Kiki, who had a powerful father like Poplar Fruit. All the clues point to one point. This case has been premeditated for a long time. Moreover, it's aimed at Kiki, or rather, at poplar fruit. Administrator Zong said seriously. He turned to look at Yin Wanxiong and didn't look at poplar fruit sitting next to him. He said softly, Director Yin, this is Ming Jing. It's only 5 kilometers away from Myanmar. Yin Wanxiong suddenly became serious and asked, You're saying that it's related to the group of people last year? Chapter 1356. Are you kidding me? Poplar fruit doesn't have money? If people heard poplar fruit's inner monologue, they would think that it was ridiculous. As the most profitable translator in history, not to mention his shares, Yanghua had sold at least 70 to 80 books through the new translation route. He had more than 10 books on the global bestseller list. Every year, he could bring in hundreds of millions of yuan in wealth. How could poplar fruit not have money? But that was the truth. Poplar fruit didn't even have more than 10 million in his bank account. Where did the rest of the money go? 70% of his income was donated to the Distance Education Charity Fund. Although distance education was supported by the government, the charity fund still played its role. Every year during winter and summer vacations, university students from all over the country would go to the mountainous areas to have in-depth exchanges with children. These expenses were all jointly funded by the charity fund and various universities. 10% was donated to Fong Beibei's Stray Cat and Dog Rescue Center. Even though the Stray Cat and Dog Rescue Center was supported by the pet hospital, the expenses were still not small. After all, other than the stray cat and dog food, there was also the maintenance of the website, travel subsidies for volunteers, and interviews with adoptive families. These were all reasons why the rescue center could not make ends meet. Even though Fong Beibei didn't expand the rescue center outside of Yangcheng, due to her and many other outstanding volunteers' hard work, the rescue center formed a very strict and scientific rescue, promotion, and adoption system. This was well known throughout the country. Many similar organizations in Beijing and Shanghai would visit the rescue center to learn from them. As for the rest of the money, Yanghua had secretly donated a lot of money. For example, she had donated a lot of money to help the poor families who were killed in the Kunming incident last year. For example, she had donated a lot of money to help the firefighters who were killed in the Jinsheng port explosion this year. Therefore, the remaining money for poplar fruit was not much. It was less than 10%. Of course, compared to ordinary people, 10% was an indescribable amount of wealth. You could buy a mansion in Yangcheng. But even though poplar fruit had done so many good deeds, when it was his turn to need money, even 100 million was not enough. This feeling was not despair, but a deep sense of helplessness and frustration. Needless to say, the robbers who kidnapped Kiki must have thought that he was rich after seeing how much money poplar fruit had donated. That was why they had opened their mouths. No matter what, poplar fruit first asked Yin Wanxiong to help find a local bank to raise 2 million in cash. Normally, 2 million in cash would require 2 suitcases and a duffel bag. If poplar fruit went alone, he would be able to carry it all by himself. Next, poplar fruit had to figure out how to borrow the remaining 100 million. Yes, poplar fruit wanted to borrow 100 million from someone, but the first person he thought of was Zheng Yujie. That was a bit ironic, wasn't it? Poplar fruit kept Zheng Yujie's feelings deep in his heart every time. Every time, he made a cruel decision for her. Even after Zheng Yujie turned 20, every time she cried, it was because of him. But how did Zheng Yujie feel about him? She supported him unswervingly. When he was raising Kiki, Zheng Yujie brought him onto the path of literary translation. When he was a nobody, Zheng Yujie created opportunities for him to become famous all over the world. When he met Artel and Mo Yin, he was with Zheng Yujie. Even when she and Poplar Fruit started a company, she didn't hesitate to share the biggest cake with him. But now, Poplar Fruit drove her away in anger, and they even fell into a cold war. Zheng Yujie came to Shidanbana because of him. His first thought was to borrow money from Zheng Yujie. However, Poplar Fruit didn't seem to have any other choice except Zheng Yujie. He had a good relationship with Artel and Yao Dehua, but they weren't close enough to lend him 100 million. not to mention Xiao Bei and Allen from the United States. Even if they were willing, they couldn't lend him 100 million in liquid funds in a short time. It was too difficult to do so in one day. The only possibility was through Zheng Yujie. Don't get me wrong, Zheng Yujie didn't have so much liquid funds. She had invested all her funds in the new translation business. But her aunt was rich. Poplar Fruit frowned, but he smiled bitterly in his heart. I'm going to owe her a favor again. Yes, when his daughter was in trouble, Poplar Fruit would still speak up, no matter how difficult it was to do so. As for Zheng Yujie, Poplar Fruit believed that if he spoke up, Zheng Yujie would help him without hesitation. This was the tacit understanding formed between the two after 4 years of cooperation. They were more than friends, but not yet lovers. It was so strange. In Shidan Bana, they were still trying their best to track down the whereabouts of the bandits. The previous video investigation had found the small pickup truck that the bandits had escaped from Meng Jinglai, but after that, there was no trace of them. Administrator Zhong speculated that it was very likely that the bandits had escaped into the forest overnight. However, Shidan Bana was so big. The forest covered an area of nearly 20 million mu. It was not something that could be found by using human wave tactics. Yin Wanxiong looked at Poplar Fruit from time to time. When they worked together on the terrorism case last year, Poplar Fruit had left a deep impression on him, but it was far less shocking than today's. At first, when he saw Poplar Fruit, he thought that Poplar Fruit didn't have a deep relationship with his daughter. Otherwise, why would he be so expressionless? But when Poplar Fruit saw the scene of tears in the video, it overturned his impression. It was not that Poplar Fruit didn't have deep feelings for his daughter, but that they were too deep. But Poplar Fruit controlled himself like a robot. He was terrifyingly calm. Yin Wanxiong even inadvertently noticed that Poplar Fruit couldn't help but emit a cold aura. If he was a veteran, he would know that it wasn't a cold aura that came from anger, but a murderous aura that came from anger. In this world, only vicious people and veterans who coldly reaped the lives of many enemies would have such a cold aura. But no matter what, Poplar Fruit's cold and unapproachable attitude made even Yin Wanxiong dare not disturb him. When he was at his wit's end, Zheng Yujie and Fong Beibei finally arrived. You didn't see wrong. Zheng Yujie and Fong Beibei did arrive at the same time. He Wenjue, Yang Jingdong, and of course, Meng Sanhua, who were in their military uniforms, followed behind them. Bro, you didn't ask me for help when such a big thing happened. You really don't respect me as your brother. He Wenjue patted Poplar Fruit's shoulder and said reproachfully. He didn't laugh, but only comforted him. Don't be afraid. Your brothers are here to help you. What was going on? Looking at Fong Beibei, who threw herself into his arms, and Zheng Yujie, who stood there with reddened eyes, Poplar Fruit was confused. Chapter 1357. The video of Chi-Chi being kidnapped went viral on the internet. Although it was quickly deleted by the internet police, this matter was completely blown out of proportion. The internet was in an uproar, and the safety of the little girl affected the hearts of many people. Of course, most people could only silently light candles and repost it. Other than showing their kindness and care, it was of no use to the investigation of the case. However, there were always some media outlets that were very annoying. They kept harassing the people around Poplar Fruit, and even the other 4 guests who had already returned home. Other than constantly criticizing the program, where are you, Dad? And using some of the past experiences of kidnapping and killing to gain attention, they did not seem to have any good intentions. Instead, they seemed to be gloating more. Of course, what the outside world was like had nothing to do with Poplar Fruit. At this time, he was not in the mood to care about social media. His phone was also with the police technicians. If the criminals called in, he might be able to seize the opportunity to locate them. While He Wenjue was carefully watching the video of the criminals, Poplar Fruit came in front of Fong Beibei and Zheng Yujie. Although there were still sparkling tears on Fong Beibei's eyelashes, she also straightened her chest and pretended to be brave, striving not to be a burden to Poplar Fruit. Zheng Yujie also pursed her lips, unwilling to look at Poplar Fruit. It was not that she did not dare. Nor was it because the two of them had been estranged from the Cold War for nearly a month. It was mainly because she could not help but reveal her emotions when looking at Poplar Fruit. In front of Fong Bei, this made her feel very awkward. The two girls were more or less haggard. After all, they had been frightened early in the morning, and then their spirits had been tense for half a day. Moreover, the military flight was fast and bumpy, and the poor quality boys would be airsick. After such a long time, not to mention Fong Bei, Zheng Yujia's face was a little pale, as if she was malnourished. Poplar Fruit lovingly helped Fong Bei brush her hair and gently said, "I'm sorry, baby. Right now, I really don't have the energy to care too much. Sometimes you have to suffer." This grievance was not only because of the negligence of the higher-ups, but also because of Zheng Yujia's dilemma. Although it was true that Poplar Fruit and Zheng Yujia were not together, it was an indisputable fact that Zheng Yujia liked Poplar Fruit and had been chasing after him. Fong Bei was not as noisy as she was at the beginning. Instead, she had been tolerating him, which made Poplar Fruit feel even more guilty. Therefore, when Poplar Fruit said this, Fong Bei couldn't help but shed a few more tears, which were gently wiped away by Poplar Fruit's finger. Of course, seeing that Poplar Fruit treated Fong Bei so well, how could Zheng Yujia not feel wronged? Poplar Fruit saw that her eyes gradually turned red, but Zheng Yujia didn't cry. She forced herself to hold back the tears in her eyes. Poplar Fruit, of course, felt a little uncomfortable, but he couldn't be as gentle to Zheng Yujia as he was to Fong Bei. After thinking about it, Poplar Fruit sighed and said helplessly, "Yujia, I have something that I need your help with." In the end, he still had to say it. He didn't beat around the bush. When talking to Zheng Yujia, he was used to being straightforward. "Say it." Zheng Yujia nodded and said, "I want to borrow money from you." Poplar Fruit gritted his teeth and prepared to say the amount. "Oh, you have no money in your card," Fong Bei exclaimed. She also suddenly remembered that the robbers wanted a huge ransom of 120 million yuan. Although she didn't have Poplar Fruit's money in her hands, Poplar Fruit never hid his income from her. Fong Bei could roughly calculate how much money he had left. "Yes, I want to borrow 94 million yuan from you," Poplar Fruit said with some loneliness. "In addition to 2 million yuan in cash, I only have a little more than 6 million yuan left. The difference is too big." Zheng Yujia opened her mouth. She originally wanted to question Poplar Fruit. "Where did you take the money that I gave you before?" This wasn't a pure question, but a question that was close to a rhetorical question, because Zheng Yujia knew the general answer. But she didn't say that Poplar Fruit was already very uncomfortable at this moment. Zheng Yujia couldn't bear to agitate him anymore. So Zheng Yujia kept a straight face, nodded, and said, "Okay, it will take some time. Wait for my reply. I will find someone to raise the money for you now." Close to 100 million yuan. Even if it was her aunt, this amount of liquid capital would have to be divided among several companies. It couldn't be provided by one company. If that happened, the capital chain would be broken, and it would be a big problem. Zheng Yujia didn't ask for anything. She didn't even ask about the interest rate, repayment time, and so on. She simply agreed and turned to walk to the balcony. Poplar Fruit looked at Zheng Yujia's elegant and neat back. He couldn't help but be a little stunned. Of course, not long after, he withdrew his gaze and looked at Fong Bei beside him. Fong Bei was also a little nervous. She even looked at him with some sadness. Poplar Fruit actually understood Fong Bei's thoughts. She suddenly felt that the gap between her and Zheng Yujia was very big. It was just like when she quarreled with Zheng Yujia. Zheng Yujia's question lingered in her ears. "What's the use of you?" When Poplar Fruit was at his most helpless, her usefulness was almost zero. On the other hand, Zheng Yujia could find a private jet and help raise such a huge amount of ransom for Poplar Fruit. Suddenly, Fong Bei's heart sank and felt sad. Although she had already registered her marriage with Poplar Fruit, she always felt that she could only act cute occasionally to please her husband. It was really useless. Silly. Thinking nonsense again? Poplar Fruit gently patted Fong Bei's head. Now that he was in a bad mood, it was difficult for him to do such an intimate action like wiggling his nose. However, he still had to comfort her. He said softly, "Don't think too much. What you need to do is to trust me." Trust him? Poplar Fruit actually didn't know. Of course, this wasn't talking about the emotional dispute between him and Zheng Yujia. Poplar Fruit's thoughts couldn't help but drift back to Kiki. He still didn't know whether his daughter was alive or dead. He wanted to save her and even use his own life to exchange for his daughter's safety, but he didn't know where to start. He couldn't find her. Because of his daughter, Poplar Fruit really didn't have much energy to care about Fong Beibei's feelings. Fong Beibei actually understood. She also suppressed the sour worry in her heart and gently pushed Poplar Fruit. She wiped away her tears and said, "Don't worry about me. Go to your work. If there's any good news, let me know." Poplar Fruit looked at Fong Beibei, who was sitting quietly on the sofa next to him. She waved her hand to indicate that she was fine. He Wenjua nodded and went back to the conference room, where He Wenjua had watched the video. "Brother, is there any good news?" Poplar Fruit asked softly. Because of Fong Beibei's arrival, although Poplar Fruit was still terrifyingly calm, the coldness that kept people 1,000 miles away had lessened a lot. "Yes." He Wenjua raised his head and looked at Poplar Fruit with a serious expression. He said, "I just watched the video and compared it with a piece of information I received before. I don't think it's that simple." Chapter 1358. Things weren't that simple. What exactly was going on? Poplar Fruit sat down next to He Wenjua and listened carefully to his analysis. The people from Cayenne province weren't here. Although Administrator Zhong was an old criminal police officer, he still had a little pride. He didn't think that a few soldiers who only knew how to use machine guns and cannons would be able to analyze anything. "Just now, Poplar Fruit, did you say that this person's accent was Shishan?" He Wenjua pointed to the masked bandit on the screen and asked. "The accent is very light. Maybe he's been outside for a long time, but it's hard to change the accent. I still heard it." Poplar Fruit nodded. Looking at his pitiful daughter in the video, he couldn't help but feel sad. However, he still didn't change his expression, as if he was watching a movie that had nothing to do with him. "The bank robbery case 4 years ago. Do you still remember that I told you that the interrogation results later found that they weren't ordinary bank robbers, but drug dealers from the north?" He Wenjua said. Why did he suddenly mention them? No matter how calm Poplar Fruit was, he couldn't help but breathe faster. He looked sternly at the robber in the video and asked doubtfully, "Big brother, do you mean that the people who kidnapped Kiki are the same group of people?" "I'm not completely sure. And even if they are, it's not the same group of people." He Wenjua analyzed. "There are 3 reasons why I think it might be them. First, the place where they sold drugs was in Shishan. The Shishan police arrested all of them. Only the 4 suspects escaped by train." He Wenjua said. In this way, the Shishan accent was very suspicious. Didn't Liu DePeo also have a Shishan accent? If the only suspect who escaped from the bank robbery case was also from Shishan, then it was very likely that he came back to seek revenge. However, this reason was too far-fetched. He Wenjua continued to analyze. "Second, didn't I tell you that one of them escaped? We've been tracking them for a long time, but we haven't found out where they escaped to. But it's very likely that we've made a mistake." He Wenjua said seriously. "We thought their boss was from Thailand, so he should have escaped to Thailand. But what if he didn't go to Thailand? Back then, the kidnappers had told him that they were in Thailand, but the dinghy had never returned. It was very likely that the escaped suspect had killed them. Then, He Wenjua's deduction was very likely to be true. Don't be fooled by the fact that these people are involved in kidnapping and extortion now. Yin Wanxiong just said that they relied on the support of the warlords and started their business through drug trafficking. It was only after Peng Jiaxing came back a few years ago and emphasized the prohibition of drugs again to win the hearts of the people that they turned to kidnapping and extortion." He Wenjua went straight to the point. "And the person who escaped back then, wasn't he a big drug lord?" Poplar Fruit frowned. It seemed that a lot of clues pointed to He Wenjua's speculation. But, in this case, what was originally a simple kidnapping, coupled with this unknown hatred, became very complicated. If it wasn't a kidnapping, but a follow-up revenge of the bank robbery 4 years ago, Poplar Fruit felt that even if he paid the ransom, Kiki's life wouldn't be guaranteed. Hyunjua wasn't done yet. He pulled up a screenshot of the surveillance video on the computer and pointed to the person in the video. He said, "This is the suspect who escaped back then. He's very anti-reconnaissance, so you can't see his face from the surveillance video. But you can compare his size. Isn't he similar to this masked man? The body shape could change, but the size wouldn't, unless it shrank with age. But it wouldn't change much in 4 years." Although the angle was biased, Poplar Fruit could see that the height of the two people should be about the same. Poplar Fruit rubbed his eyebrows tiredly. He didn't sleep yesterday, so it didn't affect him too much. But worrying about Kiki and constantly analyzing all kinds of information consumed too much of Poplar Fruit's energy. Even with the Nigong slowly nourishing his body, Poplar Fruit's energy was somewhat difficult to sustain. However, even if Poplar Fruit and the others were here to guess blindly, they couldn't do anything to the criminals. Because, until now, Poplar Fruit and the others still couldn't figure out their whereabouts. However, there was a new direction to solve the case. This might allow Administrator Zong and other experienced criminal police to find some clues. So, when Poplar Fruit and Hyunjua repeated the analysis to the police in Kaiyun, Administrator Zong rushed out again. Yin Wanxiong frowned. Although he was the director, he used to be a criminal investigator. So, when he encountered a big case, he was always interested in commanding. But this time, the police in Kaiyun lost face. A living person disappeared just like that. They used so many police and manpower, but they didn't save my daughter. Yin Wanxiong was stressed. It wasn't just the pressure of public opinion, but also because of the huge social impact caused by this incident. The higher-ups also ordered him to quickly solve the case and ensure the safety of the hostage. If it's still within Kaiyun, then it's fine. If it's really outside the country, we can only watch. Yin Wanxiong said gloomily. The police couldn't go, and the soldiers of the army couldn't go in large numbers. That was equivalent to a declaration of war between countries. If it's outside the country, then let us do it. The weapons we brought this time are not standard, and there are few people, so the target is not big. Myanmar won't find out. Don't worry, Director Yin. Hyunjua said. He found that he really came to the right place. If necessary, I will apply to the higher-ups, and also transfer a few people from our special forces to help. Yin Wanxiong said. If they went to Myanmar, it wouldn't necessarily be a matter of a dozen people. Maybe they would have to face the size of a small army. No matter what, when the time comes, please be sure to protect Kiki's safety. Poplar Fruit said, and pulled out the 2 Miao Dao from the backpack. His expression was as calm as ice. While wiping the blades, he said softly, "You don't have to worry about me. All the tactical arrangements are to rescue the hostage. I'm counting on everyone." Looking at Poplar Fruit bowing in the cold light of the 2 Miao Dao, Yin Wanxiong's eyelids trembled. He knew that the person in front of him was not an easy person to deal with. Zhang Yujia walked back with a tired face and said to Poplar Fruit, "You don't have to worry about the money. Give me those 10 accounts. I'll get someone to prepare them first." "Thank you, Yujia." Poplar Fruit bowed again. This attitude made Zhang Yujia frown. She felt uncomfortable, as if the Poplar Fruit in front of her had changed into a different person. She paused and turned to find Fong Bei. Fong Bei and Poplar Fruit had lived together for so long. She was probably the only one who could make Poplar Fruit normal. "I'm fine." Poplar Fruit shook his head. His hands held the handle of the Miao Dao, sometimes exerting force, sometimes relaxing. He seemed to want to increase his fighting strength right now. The coldness of the Miao Dao was getting stronger and stronger. This was because the Miao Dao was bloodthirsty. "Uncle." Fong Bei's soft little hand pressed on the back of Poplar Fruit's hand. Her voice made Poplar Fruit sober up a little. The beautiful girl's figure gradually became clearer. He had entered a state just now. "You didn't rest yesterday. Why don't you go and sleep first?" Fong Bei had a deeper understanding of Poplar Fruit's body. She gently advised, "There are still 10 hours. Before that, you can't ruin yourself. Go sleep, adjust your state, and then go rescue Kiki. Then we'll settle the score with those bad people. Okay?" Fong Beibei's persuasion had an effect in the end. Poplar Fruit did show signs of chi deviation because of his overthinking just now. Fortunately, he escaped in time. He closed his eyes tiredly. Without looking, he directly sheathed the dual blades. When he opened his eyes again, there were already some fluctuations of humanity. I'm going to sleep. If you have any new developments, no matter big or small, please be sure to wake me up. Poplar Fruit finally looked at Fong Beibei. He hoped that Fong Beibei could understand his meaning. Don't worry. Fong Beibei took Poplar Fruit's hand and hugged one of his hands to her chest. She looked at him worriedly. Poplar Fruit directly slept in the conference room with his clothes on. To be honest, he could not sleep, but Poplar Fruit forced himself to sleep. So tired. Poplar Fruit, who had been going smoothly for the past 4 years, felt physically and mentally exhausted for the first time. Why did he feel so powerless for the first time? Chapter 1359. For those who don't remember this foreshadowing, you can read chapters 123 to 132. Water. Everywhere was a vast and boundless ocean. The cold gazes of a smuggler and paparazzi on the sampan. When he swung his knife, it turned out to be his boss's gaze. Huff, huff, huff. It was that messy dream again. The smoker squinted his eyes. His mind was still in a daze. His hands trembled as he took out a packet of powder from the pistol beside his pillow. He opened it and pressed one side of his nose to inhale the powder. Some of the powder scattered, but the smoker didn't pay much attention to it. He still had a lot of it. What was there to be afraid of? It had been a long time since he had this dream. That cold night when he was running away in a panic seemed so real in his dreams. The world was spinning after he inhaled the powder. The smoker realized that his memories had become clearer. He still remembered the failed bank robbery. He didn't know why, but his boss, Su Pan, and Lu DePeo all died inside. Because he was waiting outside, he saw that the situation wasn't good and slipped away quickly, so he was able to escape. The small sampan set off on time, but the smoking addict was the only one left out of the original group of 4. It wasn't because of their brotherhood that he was reluctant to leave. If those guys were caught alive, they would definitely betray him, so he could only escape. However, after the sampan passed Nanyue, the smoker suddenly didn't want to go to Thailand. Because he went to Thailand, he was unfamiliar with the place and did not know Thai like Lu DePeo. The only possibility was to seek refuge with the boss's family. However, the boss and Su Pan both died in China while he survived. It was obvious that he would die if he went there. So, he decided to go to Myanmar. The smoker was left outside not because he was weak, but because he was smart. He was good at providing support. He was even the one who contacted the smuggler. Every snake had its own way of doing things. The smoker was very good at dealing with people. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that he was good at dealing with people. Why did he want to go to Myanmar? Because he didn't know any other languages. If he went to Myanmar, there would be a bunch of Chinese who spoke Mandarin. First, he would turn from guest to host. The smoker had a good plan, but the smoking addict was in trouble right from the start. The man from the smuggler's head told him that he could go to Myanmar, but the price would be 10 times higher. Seeing that Smoke Ghost was alone, he wanted to take advantage of him. But how could the cigarette addict accept this? He feigned civility and secretly seized an opportunity to pull out the dagger hidden in the bottom of his shoe. He stabbed the henchman from behind, then picked up the gun and took control of the sampan. When they reached Myanmar, the smoking addict was just as ruthless. He killed all the boatmen and sailors on the sampan. He didn't even leave the ship behind. After sinking it, he pushed it into the sea. He wanted to cut off any clues that could lead to him being tracked down and captured. He knew that based on the crimes he had committed in the West Mountains, 100 deaths were enough. In the end, the smoker found a warlord in Myanmar and used his wits to get into their most secretive and profitable drug business. Then, relying on his ruthlessness, he directly replaced the original leader the next year and pulled the local Chinese to establish a new force. The smoking addict was called the smoking addict because he sold and used poison himself. After becoming the leader, it was fortunate that he restrained himself. Otherwise, he would probably have died from overdosing like the previous leader. But good times didn't last long. Peng Jiaxing came back, and the enforcement of drug prohibition became stricter. The smoking addict's small team was no match for the king of Guogan. He could only tuck his tail between his legs. But without the huge profits of the drug business, the smoking addict couldn't support so many people. But the smoking addict was a smart person. He gathered his team again and started kidnapping and extorting people. Although it wasn't as profitable as the drug business, it still made a lot of money. Plus, he didn't have to work too hard to make a lot of money. Just as his brothers on the mountain were happily enjoying the life of luxury brought by the ransom, the smoking addict keenly realized that this kind of life wouldn't last long. He already had thoughts of retreating, but before that, he had to settle his brothers down. He couldn't just leave like that. If he publicly said that he didn't want to do it, someone would kill him in minutes and take over. The Golden Triangle was such a cruel place. Warlords fought and drug lords ran rampant. At the very least, the smoking addict had to exchange enough benefits for his subordinates before he could leave safely. At this time, the smoking addict, who often watched domestic TV series online, found poplar fruit on a domestic website. Moreover, he was also surprised to find that Yanghua was the guy who had caused him to flee in panic and wander about in misery. The smoking addict wanted revenge, but of course, it wasn't for the three brothers from 4 years ago. It was for himself. The failure back then was like an inner demon shrouding him. A few years ago, he still dreamed about the failure of the bank robbery every day. Plus, he found out that poplar fruit was also a rich person. If he could donate so much money, it was reasonable for him to share some of the money for himself. But after thinking about it for a long time, the smoking addict still didn't know where to start. He wanted to bring his men back to the country to cause trouble for poplar fruit, but that wasn't realistic. If dozens of people were to sneak back, they would probably be killed by the great border guards at the border. It wasn't safe for just a few people. More importantly, he had heard that the border guards in Guangdong were very strict, and there were people in Thailand who were investigating him. He could only give up. The smoking addict had always been paying attention to the news on the internet. He didn't expect that after half a year, poplar fruit would come knocking on his door. First, the 5 big wolves went home to visit their parents and found out where their father went to film in Mengjing. At that time, the smoking addict was excited. He immediately gathered his brothers to discuss countermeasures. He just spread the news that poplar fruit was a billionaire who could make them a lot of money. His subordinates were as excited as if they had been injected with chicken blood. Someone said that 100 million was too little. They might as well kidnap poplar fruit and make him use all his wealth to buy his life. The smoking addict smiled bitterly. Kidnapping poplar fruit, they really dared to think about it. Back then, the three of them, Boss, Su Pan, and Lu DePeo, who had guns, couldn't handle poplar fruit alone. How could they have the strength to deal with poplar fruit? The most important thing was that they couldn't bring all their brothers in arms to cross the border to commit the crime. Intimidated by poplar fruit's strength, the smoking addict came up with a new strategy, which was to kidnap his daughter. Therefore, a carefully prepared kidnapping plan was brought out. They followed, caught, kidnapped, escaped, blackmailed, ransomed, and so on. They had a chance to do it on the first day, but there were too many people walking around at that time, and the 5 big wolves weren't 100% sure. The next day, in the mountains, the 5 big wolves couldn't get close to the camp. Kiki wasn't alone, and there were armed forest policemen in the team to ensure the safety of the guests. Finally, on the 3rd day, when poplar fruit wasn't paying attention, the 5 big wolves finally succeeded. They didn't even need to use the last trump card of more than a dozen armed forces. Administrator Zhong guessed right. That night, they sneaked back to Myanmar through the Luo River, leaving no chance for the Cayenne police to find them. Of course, there was still one person who stayed in Shidambana. He was responsible for receiving the video from Myanmar and uploading it to the internet. Then, he used a local phone card to send instructions to poplar fruit. In this way, poplar fruit couldn't know that the next step was to go to Myanmar, so the police were left outside the border. Why would they be afraid of a poplar fruit with dozens of guns? This was a kidnapping plan that the smoking addict had spent a month to come up with. He proudly said to his men, "Look at my head, it's flawless." Chapter 1360. Deep in the mountains and forests, although it was quiet and dark, and there was no movement of any creatures, it was terrible, as if it was a horror scene in a movie. Poplar fruit seemed to be the incarnation of a magical existence that could integrate with everything in the world. One moment, he was wandering on a deserted path, and the next moment, he seemed to be floating in the sky, overlooking the world below. Where is this? Poplar fruit floated in the air for a while in a daze. Suddenly, he heard a weak cry for help in the wind. "Papa, help me! Kiki!" In an instant, Poplar fruit felt as if his blood was flowing backward, and his head suddenly swelled. He remembered that he was here to save his daughter. "Where is Kiki? Where is Kiki?" Poplar fruit floated like a ghost and bumped around like a headless fly. But no matter how hard he bumped, he could not find any trace of his daughter. He wanted to follow the sound, but the cry for help was like a surround sound speaker. It came from all directions, and he could not find the source at all. Look, look! But he did not see a single figure. Not to mention a figure, even a living thing could not be seen. Even the towering trees seemed to be lifeless. Poplar fruit found that he was getting tired quickly. Gradually, the more he floated, the more tired he became. But he was still looking. Even if he was tired to death, he would find his daughter, who was crying and calling for her father. Finally, he saw a shabby factory hidden in the vast mountains. He did not know what it was manufacturing, but it was enough to make Poplar fruit happy. After searching for a long time, he found a place where there might be people. Maybe his daughter was inside. Poplar fruit's mental state was a little strange at the moment. It was as if he had gone crazy. He did not care whether there were enemies inside or not, and rushed in recklessly. Kiki! Kiki! Suddenly, Poplar fruit saw a window. Through the window, he could see his daughter tied to a chair miserably, just like what he saw in the video, but she was even more haggard. She hadn't rested well and hadn't eaten well. Her little face was almost as thin as an oval face. Before she was tied up, her hair, which had been washed clean, was now dirty. Her arms and ankles were a little red and swollen because of the hemp rope. Seeing this, Poplar fruit was so distressed that tears almost flowed out of his eyes. But strangely, Poplar fruit could not cry. Kiki was locked up alone. Strangely, there was not a single enemy guarding the entire factory. But Poplar fruit didn't care whether it was strange or not. He just wanted to untie the rope and save his daughter. However, his previously invincible and intangible body couldn't even pass through a small iron door. Poplar fruit angrily pounded on the iron door with his fist, but the iron door did not budge. Even the sound of knocking could not be heard. It was as silent as the surroundings. Of course, even if he didn't care whether his body could take it or not, he wouldn't feel any pain. What a strange feeling. But gradually, he became desperate. It was close at hand, but it seemed to be at the end of the world. Poplar fruit clung to the window, but he couldn't even break the thin window. He could only struggle to call his daughter, but he couldn't make any sound. He gradually went crazy. "Papa, boo-hoo, is it Papa?" Kiki seemed to feel something. The little girl raised her tear-stained face and looked at the window where Poplar fruit was struggling. But her eyes seemed to pass through Poplar fruit and didn't stop. "It's Papa! It's Papa! Kiki, don't be afraid. Papa is coming to save you." Poplar fruit shouted in his heart, but he couldn't break through the thin wall. His heart was full of hope, but it gradually turned into despair. Suddenly, he heard a roar. Poplar fruit jumped to the window and looked in. He found that his daughter was gradually retreating with the chair and gradually disappeared into the endless darkness. "No!" Poplar fruit suddenly shouted and struggled to get up from the bed. Fong Bei Bei, who heard the sound outside, quickly opened the door and walked in. She was also very tired. Sitting outside, she almost fell asleep, but she was worried about Poplar fruit's physical and mental state. She didn't dare to sleep. "How is it?" Fong Bei Bei was worried and gently patted Poplar fruit's back. His back was wet with cold sweat. She handed the hot water that she had poured before to Poplar fruit and said with heartache, "Don't ruin your body. Kiki is blessed by the heavens. She will be fine." Poplar fruit took a big gulp and handed the cup to Fong Bei. He looked at her gratefully and said softly, "I know. I just dreamed of Kiki, so my reaction was a bit big." After drinking the cup of hot water, a warm feeling flowed from his stomach to his whole body. Poplar Fruit could finally draw a clear line between illusion and reality. Fong Bei put the cup aside, then opened her arms and hugged Poplar Fruit's waist from the side. Poplar Fruit also opened his big hands and hugged Fong Bei in his arms. He let her beautiful face gently stick to his chest. "I know that you are very worried about Kiki, but no matter what decision you make, I will support you 100%. Fong Bei said, and her voice was a bit choked. "But if anything happens to you, I will go with you." Originally, Fong Bei's spirit had been tense for almost the whole day. She had always been very strong, but at this time, when it came to the depths of love, her emotions began to lose control. Pisces girls were the most insecure, and they were the easiest to let their imagination run wild. Fong Bei had been a lot better in recent years, but she was still deeply dependent on Poplar Fruit. Poplar Fruit sighed and rubbed Fong Bei's head. He said with heartache, "Silly, what nonsense are you talking about? We'll be fine." Fong Bei obediently murmured. Poplar Fruit knew Fong Bei's current state. He gently patted Fong Bei's back and said, "Go to sleep first. Don't talk about me. Don't ruin your own body." "What about you?" Fong Bei asked softly. "I have slept for 4 hours. For the first time ever, Yonghua slept for an extra hour." He said, "I've already revived with full health and mana." Poplar Fruit even made a small joke. Although it was not funny at all, it could more or less make Fong Bei feel at ease. She was too worried about Poplar Fruit's mental state. "I will go out and have a look. Hopefully, there will be new progress." Poplar Fruit covered Fong Bei with a quilt and considerately tucked in the corner of the quilt. To the enemy, Poplar Fruit was ruthless. To his wife, Poplar Fruit would only be gentle. "I will watch you go out before I sleep." Fong Bei curled up in the quilt full of Poplar Fruit's body temperature. She obediently nodded and said a little coquettishly. Poplar Fruit smiled, stood up, and walked out. On the way, he turned off the light. It was actually just a dream. Standing at the door, Poplar Fruit showed his powerlessness and decadence on his face. He clenched his fist and faintly sighed. "Daughter, where are you?" Chapter 1361. It was already late at night, but there was still no news. Yin Wanxiong only gave a new update. The border patrols had been strengthened. However, it didn't work. Poplar Fruit didn't know about the public opinion online, nor did he want to read it. People came and went in the command center. Poplar Fruit walked into the meeting room where Big Brother, he, and the others were resting. Meng Sanhua was lying on the table with his legs crossed and a jacket covering his body. The three of them were taking turns to rest. He Wenjua and Yang Zhengdong were sitting on the side energetically. It seemed that they had already slept. Seeing Meng Sanhua sleeping, Poplar Fruit wasn't worried. He pulled a chair over and sat down. When these soldiers were sleeping, as long as she didn't yell in their ears, they would be able to sleep peacefully. He Wenjua glanced at Poplar Fruit and said calmly, "Don't worry." Even though Poplar Fruit was expressionless, the worry and anxiety in his eyes were as thick as espressos. Poplar Fruit nodded slightly. He didn't say anything and just looked at He Wenjua and Yang Zhengdong. The two of them also had nothing to do. One was dismantling and reassembling a weapon, while the other was practicing his fighting techniques with a dagger. He Wenjua reassembled the gun and handed it to Poplar Fruit. Poplar Fruit realized that the gun was still his. "You've been hiding it for too long. There's some dust on the barrel. Let me wipe it for you." He Wenjua loved guns as much as his life. He was different from Poplar Fruit, who was just a gun enthusiast. Even though the dust didn't affect the use of the gun, he just didn't like it. He was like a Virgo with OCD in this aspect. Poplar Fruit picked up the gun, removed the clip, and pulled the bolt. He knew that the gun was fine, but he still shook his head and said to He Wenjua, "Bro, do you have any more clips?" Fong Bei had brought the gun, but she only brought one full clip. It wasn't enough. "You don't need so many bullets in a frontal attack, right?" Yang Zhengdong smiled. "Don't worry, I'll cover you with a sniper. I still need it." Poplar Fruit insisted. He Wenjua shook his head. He took out 2 empty clips and a box of bullets from his backpack and handed them to Poplar Fruit. He Wenjua was careful. A silencer. Give me one too. Yonghua looked at the bag behind He Wenjua, which was like an ammunition depot, and was very envious. He Wenjua rolled his eyes, turned around, and handed it to him. Since he was going to bring a weapon, Poplar Fruit had to prepare well. First, he changed into a refined combat uniform. It was also He Wenjua's. It was dark green and was very hidden in the forest. Of course, Poplar Fruit tore off the military and nationality symbols. The gun was tied to his left calf with a holster. It could be hidden by pulling down his trouser leg. The 2 clips were loaded and pinned to his waist. There was a small, delicate pocket there. Poplar Fruit didn't bring the rest of the bullets. He didn't need that many. In addition to the gun, Yonghua also followed He Wenjua's request and stuffed a small GPS signal device in her shirt pocket. This way, He Wenjua and the others could use the GPS to determine Yonghua's location. As for how to carry the 2 long Miao Dao, Poplar Fruit was still thinking about it. It was too conspicuous to carry on his back, but it couldn't fit in the money bag. It would look like a burden instead. Poplar Fruit was in a dilemma. Suddenly, a police officer rushed over and shouted, "Poplar Fruit, there's news." Behind him was Fong Bei Bei, who was still rubbing her eyes. It seemed that the police officer had woken her up. Suddenly, there was chaos. Poplar Fruit was the first to rush to the command center, followed by He Wenjua and the others. Zheng Yujia, who had put on her clothes, hurried over. "What's the situation?" Poplar Fruit asked. Yin Wanxiong handed Poplar Fruit's phone to him. There was a short message on it. "Prepare the money. You have 2 hours to reach the following address. Only you are allowed to come. If there is a second person following, they will be held hostage." To be precise, it was a multimedia message because the so-called address was actually a screenshot of a map. Poplar Fruit didn't know much about the geography of the area. He asked doubtfully, "Where is this?" Yin Wanxiong said with an ugly expression, "Myanmar, east 10 peaks of the Dajita Mountains." He opened a military map and pointed to the computer screen for Poplar Fruit to see. It was not far, really not far. It was actually 4 kilometers from the border. But these 4 kilometers, for Yin Wanxiong, were like heaven and earth. This meant that no matter how many police officers he had, no matter how many elite special police officers he had, they would not be able to cross the border to help Poplar Fruit. This kidnapper was really too cunning. Almost everyone had the same thought in their minds. It wasn't just the choice of location, but also the time. It was already late at night, and there were still 5 hours before the deadline that the kidnapper had mentioned. This meant that Poplar Fruit had to cross the border in the middle of the night, which also meant that there would be a lot of obstacles in the rescue operation. Not to mention Poplar Fruit, He Wenjua, and the other 2 definitely wouldn't be able to move freely in the middle of the night. In 2 hours, if they acted now, it might only be enough. If they still dilly-dallied, it would be completely impossible to reach the destination. Fortunately, the only good news was that the 2 million yuan had been prepared. Yin Wanxiong had also told the border guards that they would turn a blind eye and let Poplar Fruit cross the border. But everything had not been deployed yet. The special forces of the Shu-Du military region had not arrived yet. Should they discuss with the other party about the time? Impossible. Every time the other party sent a message, the SIM card would be taken off. There was no way to contact them. The other party was like Zhuge Liang, strategizing and controlling everything from the shadows. The police couldn't get any information at all. They could only be passive. What should they do? What should they do? Yin Wanxiong and Kai Yun were arguing with each other. But Poplar Fruit was very calm. On the contrary, he was a little happy because he had enough of waiting without any news. The sooner the rescue operation started, the sooner Kiki could be rescued. "Don't say anything. I'll go first." "Brother, you come half an hour later. Be careful not to get too close to me, in case we expose our whereabouts." Poplar Fruit said calmly. Then he turned to look at Yin Wanxiong. "If they can catch up, please help them. If they can't, we'll take action first." He Wenjua nodded. Although the mission was very dangerous, he, Yang Jingdong, and Meng Sanhua were all dancing on the edge of a knife. No, they all have guns. It's too dangerous, Yin Wanxiong said excitedly. Poplar fruit, this is not the time to show off. No matter how good your kung fu is, you can't avoid being shot, you know? It's too late. Poplar fruit pressed on Yin Wanxiong's shoulder and said softly. Yin Wanxiong paused for a moment and let out a depressed sigh. Chapter 1362. Poplar Fruit quickly packed his luggage, 2 large suitcases stuffed with 2 million in cash and a duffel bag, including 2 Miao Dao that were tied diagonally to the top of the suitcases. From afar, it was impossible to see any flaws. Downstairs, he stuffed the suitcases into the back of the police jeep. Not only the 2 girls, Fang Beibei and Zheng Yujie, but also Yin Wanxiong and the other police officers stood behind Poplar Fruit with heavy expressions. It was as if Poplar Fruit was about to embark on a path of no return. Going alone into a bandit's nest that might have dozens of gunmen, what would the result be? Even if he knew that Poplar Fruit was superhuman, and that he Wunjua and the others were battle-hardened, Yin Wanxiong still felt that it was a hopeless situation. But Poplar Fruit insisted on going. As a father, Yin Wanxiong understood Poplar Fruit's feelings very well. If it were him, he would also risk his life to save his daughter. So Yin Wanxiong's feelings were very complicated. But Poplar Fruit didn't mean to take care of his thoughts. He hugged Fang Beibei and comforted her. Fang Beibei shed tears, but she didn't dare to cry out loud, afraid that it would affect Poplar Fruit's mood. Patting Fang Beibei's shoulder, Poplar Fruit forced a smile and said, "Why are you crying? It's not like I'm not coming back." As soon as these words came out, Zheng Yujie, who was at the back, could no longer be strong. She also covered her mouth, and 2 lines of clear tears poured down. Fang Beibei was even more unable to control her emotions. 2 girls, one was his wife, and the other, including He Wunjua, looked at them with a strange expression. It was a kind of dilemma that they wanted to ask, but couldn't. Poplar Fruit looked at the 2 girls and didn't feel good. He clenched his teeth and hugged Zheng Yujie into his arms. He didn't hug them all, but his long arms still gave Zheng Yujie support to wipe her tears. Although there was a suspicion of hugging left and right, Poplar Fruit swore that his thoughts were really pure. He couldn't let his feelings go on. It had been 15 minutes since he received the message. Poplar Fruit had to hurry up and get on the road. Poplar Fruit hugged the 2 girls' shoulders tightly. His tone returned to calm, and he said firmly, "Okay, trust me, I'll bring Kiki and me back safely." He Wunjua finally held the car door and reminded Poplar Fruit, "Be careful, don't be rash." Poplar Fruit was very strong, stronger than many ordinary Special Forces soldiers, but the other party had Kiki as a hostage. He Wunjua was worried that Poplar Fruit would act irrationally. Poplar Fruit nodded and finally looked back at them deeply. He waved his hand and turned to get into the car. The Jeep was a little shaky on the mountain road, and no one spoke the whole way. Poplar Fruit pressed one hand on his Miao Dao scabbard, and his eyes were slightly closed. The closer they were to danger, the colder Poplar Fruit felt his boiling blood become. He might be a natural warrior, but this time he was here to save people and take revenge. Soon, they arrived at the border. A team of border guards walked over from the sentry post. They looked at Poplar Fruit, who got out of the car, and waved their hands to let him go with them. However, they kept a straight face and didn't say anything, as if nothing had happened. It was Poplar Fruit's first time crossing the border without a visa, but he didn't have time to record his feelings. He carried the backpack diagonally and dragged the 2 suitcases. He buried his head and walked into the vast world shrouded in darkness. In the summer night, there was a bit of fog in the hot and humid mountain forest. Poplar Fruit soon felt that his clothes were sticky, but his footsteps were firm, and he walked in the direction and route in his memory. It was quiet all around, and no one was following him. Poplar Fruit knew that he was the only one who could continue on this path. It was a little inconvenient to drag the suitcases through the mountain forest. From time to time, rocks or tree roots would bump it up, and the suitcases stuffed with 100 yuan would often twist and overturn on the ground. Too slow. Poplar Fruit frowned. This speed was only a little faster than normal walking. Instead of dragging it, it would be better Poplar Fruit exerted force on his wrist and lifted the two suitcases with his hands. It was like a monk in a novel using a wooden bucket to carry water. Using both hands, he walked as if he was flying. Only Poplar Fruit had the strength and stamina to lift and carry something that weighed more than 15 kilograms, and then run for nearly 2 kilometers in a spurt of energy. About half of the journey, Poplar Fruit took a break to catch his breath. At the same time, he took out the police GPS provided by Yin Wanxiong to confirm his position to ensure that he didn't go the wrong way. Although his memory and sense of direction weren't bad, walking in the pitch-black forest, Yang didn't dare to guarantee that he wouldn't go astray as he walked. Speaking of which, Poplar Fruit's night vision wasn't bad. Although it wasn't as good as night vision goggles, it was still much better than ordinary people. This was because his eyes could see very clearly through the weak moonlight at night. The forest was indeed pitch black, but for Poplar Fruit, it was like walking in a dark alley. He could still see the ground clearly. Indeed, he didn't walk to the 2-kilometer mark, but it wasn't because he was going in the wrong direction. Poplar Fruit thought for a moment and suddenly realized the distance marked on the map was that long, but in reality, there was still a big deviation. Just like how you had to turn when there was a tree in front of you, Poplar Fruit would also try to walk around a small hill in front of him. So after walking around and around, the distance increased by a lot. In this way, Poplar Fruit had to speed up. Otherwise, if he couldn't get to the designated place on time, Poplar Fruit couldn't imagine the consequences. In this way, Poplar Fruit walked in the forest in the dark, as if he didn't care about the foreign land under his feet. He also didn't care if he would encounter wild beasts or even bandits lying in ambush on the side of the road, waiting to catch him, a turtle in a jar. Of course, Poplar Fruit still maintained vigilance. Although he didn't care, he still paid attention to his surroundings with his senses. He didn't have time to look left and right. Arrived, Poplar Fruit spent more than half an hour to walk the remaining 4 kilometers. This was much slower than a marathon, but it couldn't be helped. Who asked Poplar Fruit to carry 2 heavy boxes of money? This was already a very amazing result. Arriving at the designated place 20 minutes early, Poplar Fruit frowned and looked around vigilantly. Then he carefully walked towards the so-called landmark building, a small wooden house built in the mountains. It was so simple that it couldn't even be compared to the small range shed in the orchard. But there was nothing inside, not even a person. Did I go the wrong way? Chapter 1363. On this day, Xiaoluoka was very anxious. He was listless in class. After class, he had been squatting in front of the computer, refreshing Weibo and the news over and over again. He couldn't eat or sleep well if he didn't see any good news. Many girls who had a crush on him saw their Prince Charming so haggard, and their hearts were broken. Xiaoluoka was a strange name because he gave it to himself. He was an international student from Canada. He was a Chinese and Canadian hybrid, which made him the most popular boy in Shuimu University. But in fact, Xiaoluoka rarely attended parties for international students. He was a traditional boy. In other words, he was a shy otaku. Because of Chinese culture, he came to China to study. Now, not only could he speak fluent and slightly accented Mandarin, but he also liked to read Chinese online novels and variety shows. Recently, Xiaoluoka liked a newly broadcast parent-child variety show, especially My Daughter's Guest, Kiki. Not to mention how beautiful this girl was. Her kindness, naivety, and cuteness when she interacted with her father made Xiaoluoka very fond of her. Xiao Luo had analyzed just what level of affection he had for Chi-Chi was at. The little girl was very beautiful. There was no doubt about that, but she was too young to make Xiaoluoka have that kind of pink adoration. If it wasn't the attraction between men and women, then his love for Kiki should be similar to the love of a big brother to a little sister. Or he should also be overflowing with fatherly love. She was good-looking, and every frown and smile made the dim dormitory bright, making everyone who saw her want to hold her in their arms and love her. Wearing a princess dress, she was as exquisite as a real princess. Even if she changed into ordinary clothes, it couldn't hide her delicate and beautiful appearance. Her personality was also very likable. Other than dreaming of being a princess, the little girl didn't seem to have too many ambitious goals. She was usually gentle and kind. She wouldn't argue with others, nor would she play any tricks. On the contrary, she could actively take responsibility and help her friends complete their tasks. Not only was there no competition, Kiki was also her father's warm baby. When she was playing games, she was worried about her father, and the tears that fell down her face made people feel distressed and warm in their hearts. Of course, Kiki was definitely not a fragile and crybaby girl like Lindayu. Seeing her carrying a heavy basket and running like the wind, almost everyone in the audience couldn't help but laugh from the bottom of their hearts. Also, the little girl was very smart. She remembered everything her father said. Sometimes the little stories she made up could make you laugh the whole day. That's right, when the little girl first appeared, everyone thought that she was a quiet little lady. But later, they realized that she could also be playful and cute. Big Yang, Little Yang, Little Yang. The little girl did not make her father dizzy, but the audience was attracted by her cuteness. Who wouldn't want such a beautiful, good-natured, smart, and cute little girl as their daughter? Xia Luo, who was not married yet, had never considered the problem of his marriage. However, where did his father go in 2 phases, he realized that he wanted to get married. To be exact, she wanted to have a daughter as cute as Kiki. This wish could not be turned into reality, because to get married, he had to find a girlfriend who was willing to marry him. Now, Charlotte did not have a girlfriend. However, he, who liked to read online novels, also liked to fantasize about himself being reborn into the past, then find a girlfriend he liked and have a super beautiful and cute daughter. Well, after watching the season's show, he would write a novel like this online. The protagonist was also a Canadian. The main plot was to go to Taiwan to start a variety show and eventually become an entertainment tycoon. Of course, he had to marry a very beautiful Chinese girl and have a super beautiful little princess. Finally, he came to the mainland to plan a parent-child show called Where Are We Going, Dad? And bring his daughter to participate as a guest. Xia Luo had already thought of the name of the novel. It would be called My Princess. The protagonist's surname was also Xia, and his name was Xia Kelly. It was very similar to the pronunciation of chocolate. He was a very gentle and sweet man. His daughter's name was Xia Tian because she met you this summer, liked you, and wanted to protect you. Just thinking about it made him happy. However, in the morning, he saw the news that suddenly broke out on the internet. During the recording of the show, Kiki was kidnapped. At first, Xia Luo thought that it was fake news, but his last bit of hope was shattered by the kidnapping video that went viral on the internet. Sometimes, fantasies brought about very real feelings. Although he was just an ordinary audience member and only began to pay attention to and like this little girl this month, Kiki's misfortune seemed to be his daughter's misfortune. All of Xia Luo's good mood disappeared. All that was left was his concern, worry, and anxiety for Kiki. For the whole day, Xia Luo didn't eat or drink. He only browsed the computer with all kinds of security experts' guesses. He didn't see the police or Poplar Fruit come forward to say anything about the latest developments. Why didn't anyone tell everyone what the situation was? Even if you were short of money, Poplar Fruit just had a shout on Weibo, and our fans would pay for Kiki's redemption. It had to be said that many fans were as cute as Xia Luo. However, a day passed without any progress. When he went to bed at night, Xia Luo couldn't sleep. He browsed the news over and over again, even if it was boring and unconfirmed news. He still couldn't sleep until 3 o'clock in the morning. Xia Luo was disappointed. At this moment, Poplar Fruit was dragging dozens of kilograms of cash and rushing through the mountains outside the southwest border. How could he have the time to take out his mobile phone and post on Weibo? Even if it was the public security department's news briefing on Sayun's side, they wouldn't reveal the slightest bit of secrets at this critical juncture of the case. What if the bandits were also watching? Of course, Xia Luo was quite extreme after all. Many people ate what they should and slept what they should. However, Kiki's uncertain life and death really affected the hearts of millions of fans. They also called out in their hearts, "Come back. Kiki, you must be strong and wait for the police uncle to bring you back." As if feeling the power of this belief, Poplar Fruit gritted his teeth and ran madly through the mountains and forests. He was already very tired. There was no other way. Carrying dozens of kilograms of things, he had already run more than 10 kilometers continuously. He ran from night to day, and gradually there was a green and white halo. The hateful bandits seemed to be playing with him. Every time he arrived at a location, there would be a new text message in less than 15 minutes, prompting him to run to the next location. The intention was obvious. They wanted to exhaust Poplar Fruit's physical strength. At the same time, they inadvertently disrupted the deployment between Poplar Fruit and Hiwenjua. Hiwenjua and the other two would always come up empty every time they didn't know where the final location was. This was very likely to be discovered by the other party. Poplar Fruit had already informed Big Brother he not to act rashly. He would wait until he confirmed the location before informing them of the operation. Chapter 1364. Nab was one of the confidants of the boss, the smoking addict. He was a Burmese, and he was the only one who was qualified to be a sub-boss in this team, with more Chinese people. The reason was simple. He was saved by the smoking addict from a mine, and he even took a bullet for the smoking addict. He swore that he would only be the smoking addict's lackey and had no greater ambitions. It was because of his loyalty that the smoking addict sent him out. He ran around the few contact points to keep an eye on the rich guy called Fruit. The smoking addict told his subordinates that only Nab was trustworthy. The other people he sent out might kill Poplar Fruit and run away with the 2 million. Then they could forget about getting the 100 million. Therefore, the naive Nab felt that he had a great responsibility, and he spent the entire night messing with Poplar Fruit. Of course, he was happy, because through his binoculars he could see that the idiot egg in every contact point was being played by him. It was like a cat playing with a mouse. Of course, it was not that the other party did not react at all. At the first contact point, he hit on a small hill nearby and observed Poplar Fruit through his binoculars. He noticed that the person suddenly turned his head and looked in his direction. At that moment, he felt like a thief who was suddenly forced into a corner by the headlights of several police cars. He almost pissed his pants and wanted to run away, but fortunately, Poplar Fruit quickly turned his head. He breathed a sigh of relief. That's right. How could he be discovered so easily? He must have made a blind guess. After that, he secretly observed Poplar Fruit a few times, but Nab did not notice him. Therefore, Nab was relieved. Every time, he would wait for Poplar Fruit to leave for a long time. When he saw that there was no one following him, he would jump down the hill and ride his bicycle to the next location. Nab hummed a weird Chinese song as he arrived at the observation point that he had already set up. He was loyal to the Chinese boss, and he knew that if he wanted to be a good lackey, he had to learn how to communicate with the boss. What is the most important element of communication? It wasn't sincerity, nor was it flattery. It was because they shared the same language. Although the team leader had learned Burmese, he couldn't speak it well. As an outstanding lackey, he should learn Chinese well and not make things difficult for the team leader. Only then would the team leader put him in an important position. As for the Chinese song, Nab had learned it from the 5 Great Wolves. The small leader called 5 Big Wolves was also the confidant of the big leader. Naibo asked him how he could speak Chinese well. 5 Big Wolves told him that if he wanted to learn Chinese well, he had to know how to sing this singer called Zhou Gongju. This was the easiest song to learn. All right, I've gone a little too far. Naibo threw down his bicycle and ran up the mountain peak that wasn't too high. It was also a good place to observe from a distance. Naibo took out a pair of old binoculars from his sling bag and glanced over. Sure enough, that rich guy named Guo was already there. Although he had a bicycle and was familiar with the roads, Poplar Fruit always arrived before him. Naibo didn't even need to guess. Of course, other factors aside, Naibo still admired Poplar Fruit. After running for half the night, he was still able to run so fast. It was too amazing. The sky was just starting to brighten. There was no light, but Naibo could see clearly behind the tree. The black figure was motionless. He was probably tired, right? Even an Iron Man wouldn't be able to withstand such torment. Naibo gritted his teeth. I don't know how many more trips I have to make. Don't make me ride the bicycle to fetch him when he collapses. That would be a pain in the ass. Naibo muttered in Burmese. He took out his phone. It was the classic 1050 model from Nordic Walnut Smashing. In China, it could only be used as a spare phone for a spare phone. No one would want it even if it was given to them. Even in the increasingly prosperous stronghold, everyone had upgraded their guns to cannons. Even the small fries were using smartphones. But in Naibo's hands, the 1050 was still like a treasure, because it was given to him by the team leader 3 years ago. It was a symbol of trust and glory. No matter what, the 1050 could still be used to make a call. Naibo realized that there were still 5 minutes to the agreed time. He didn't wait any longer. He followed the agreement and sent a confirmation message back to the stronghold. This way, the stronghold would know that Fruit was still under their control. Then, Fruit would receive a new message and continue to run to the next location. Naibo had played with this process for a few hours and 5 or 6 times. He had already gotten the hang of it. He grinned and stared at the black figure in the distance through his binoculars. He muttered excitedly, 10, 9, 8. He was still counting down in Chinese, although his pronunciation was weird. Naibo was very accurate the last time. When the countdown reached 1, the black figure would move and take out his phone to see the message sent to him by the stronghold. He was like Zhuge Liang, who could foresee things like a god. 2, 1. Naibo was depressed. Why wasn't the black figure moving this time? Could it be that the 5 great wolves were slacking off and teasing him? Are you waiting for this? Suddenly, a voice in Burmese came from behind. Scaring people would scare people to death. Naibo was shocked. At that moment, his hair stood on end and his scalp went numb. He subconsciously turned his head and saw a man standing behind him, looking at him coldly. However, his left hand was raised in front of him, and there was a bright phone in his hand. However, Naibo's attention was not on it all. His pupils dilated instantly. He recognized the man who had appeared behind him without him knowing. It was actually Fruit. Wait a minute, wasn't he behind that tree? Could he teleport? Could he be a clone? How is that possible? How could he appear behind him without a sound? Was he a ghost? At that moment, thousands of thoughts flashed through Naibo's mind. It was impossible to sort them out. He could only twist them together. It was a mess. It was a mess. He could only cut the Gordian knot. Naibo subconsciously reached for the gun on his belt. As long as he had the gun, everything would be under his control. Naibo didn't even consider if he would shoot Fruit. However, the quick knife wasn't his. Naibo suddenly felt his vision blur. His vision was a little slippery, as if he was sitting on a skateboard. Then, he fell into endless darkness. Plop! A body fell heavily to the ground. The head and the body seemed to have separated. Scarlet blood immediately dyed the ground red. The sky was still green, and there wasn't a trace of sunlight. However, the dark green shrubs and weeds were already covered with blood-red dewdrops that wouldn't disappear even if the sun rose. This was just the beginning. Chapter 1365. Poplar Fruit didn't even look at Nab, who had fallen to the ground. His face was as calm as still water. He was so calm that he reminded people of those cold-blooded poisonous snakes. He lowered his head and glanced at the Meowed Owl that he had pulled out at an unknown time and pointed diagonally at the ground. The surface of the Meowed Owl was as bright as a mirror. Only the sharp edge of the blade was stained with a trace of barely visible blood. Poplar Fruit's blade was too fast. Even Nab, who was still showing off just a moment ago, couldn't clearly see what had separated his head from his body. After starting the massacre, Poplar Fruit didn't have any emotional fluctuations. He squatted down and picked up the Noji 1050 that couldn't be broken no matter how he dropped it. He flipped through the phone's message records to verify his previous thoughts. In fact, when Poplar Fruit was at the first location, he had already noticed Nab's spying. His mysterious premonition had come into play again. However, after he took a glance, he still maintained his calm and collected state. After that, Poplar Fruit followed the other party's instructions and kept running. He ran to 6 or 7 locations and only now did he make his move. During this process, Nab didn't know that the seemingly stupid poplar fruit had already locked onto his position. Through comparison, Nab had figured out the pattern of his choice of observation points and the interval between when he started spying. Therefore, this time, after poplar fruit arrived, he first observed the appearance of the surrounding forest. Then, without stopping, he immediately took off his jacket and used the lever of the trolley box and the cover of the forest to create the appearance of a dummy. Even though it was dawn, looking from afar, it was impossible to tell if it was a real person or a dummy. Poplar Fruit was also betting on his own judgment. The other party wouldn't arrive so early and wouldn't realize that he had swapped the crown prince with a raccoon. He didn't hesitate at all to throw $2 million in cash on spot. Holding his Meow-Dao, he groped his way up to the observation point that he guessed the other party would choose and then hid in a big tree. Fortunately, Poplar Fruit's judgment was completely correct. The other party rode a bicycle and appeared in his field of vision. Then, without any warning, he made him stand behind and watch him for a long time. Of course, this had a lot to do with Poplar Fruit's ability to restrain his aura. Poplar Fruit watched all of Naboo's actions and understood the entire process of Naboo contacting the criminals. In this way, he didn't have to be led by the nose by the other party, and he didn't have to play hide and seek with Naboo anymore. Nabo no longer had any value. Of course, Poplar Fruit originally wanted to interrogate Naboo, but it seemed that the other party didn't cooperate and directly took out his gun. How could Poplar Fruit tolerate this? He took advantage of the hatred that had been suppressed for a long time. Like Shimin Chue Shue, he brazenly pulled out his knife. Although he didn't have the Night of the Moon or the Summit of the Forbidden City, his knife was like lightning, and he broke through the ghost door. Comparing the information in Naboo's phone and his own information, Poplar Fruit found that the phone number that Naboo contacted was different from the one displayed on his phone. Moreover, it was more like a foreign number. Perhaps there was a mystery here. Poplar Fruit immediately informed He Wenjua and Yin Wanxiong in China, asking them to investigate and track this phone number. As for himself, Poplar Fruit put away the two phones and sighed softly. Although he killed the other party's surveillance, Kiki's whereabouts were still unknown. He still had to continue to follow the other party's instructions. When he reached the vicinity of the next location, he would pretend to be the surveillance person and send a text message to the criminals, hoping to end this torment early and find his daughter. Poplar Fruit wasn't afraid of getting dirty. He searched Naboo's body and didn't find any other meaningful clues. He only took his telescope that had a broken lens, and one of the lenses could still be used for reconnaissance. He didn't take the gun. Poplar Fruit didn't care about that broken pistol. Shaking his head, Poplar Fruit stood up. Originally, he wanted to look at the place where he had just replaced the flower with the tree. But Poplar Fruit was suddenly stunned. Although the hillside wasn't high, only about a few dozen meters, looking down from a height was completely different from staying at the foot of the hill and looking left and right. He didn't feel that he was very tall, but he felt that he was very familiar. Why did he feel that he was very familiar? This was Myanmar, a country that Poplar Fruit had never been to before. Did he pass by this place when he was on his way? Impossible. Although the other party had directed him to go around in circles in this vast forest, there wasn't a single path that was repeated or intersected. Wait, this angle, this view. Suddenly, Poplar Fruit's scalp went numb. With his excellent memory, he finally remembered where he had seen this scene before. Wasn't this what he had seen in the nightmare a few hours ago? No, it wasn't the valley where the factory had landed, but a mountain peak and forest that he had seen when he was flying through the air unconsciously. God, Poplar Fruit's breathing was heavy. He compared the two scenes again and again. It was like he was playing a game of finding fault. He compared the scene before him and the scene in his memory. The layout of the trees and the height of the mountain peak were exactly the same. How was this possible? What was going on? Poplar Fruit couldn't believe his eyes in judgment. Wait a minute. Yanghua forcefully closed his eyes. He was forcing himself to calm down. He was forcing himself to remove some of the chaotic rational thoughts and temporarily replace them with a more serious emotional thought process. Right, Kiki? Poplar Fruit suddenly opened his eyes. What dream, memory, and terrifying coincidence. Why did he care so much? If his previous dream was a miraculous reflection of reality, then it meant that Chi-Chi was locked up in the same room of the factory he dreamed of last night. In the dream, he couldn't break the door or window to bring his daughter back. But in reality, such a setting didn't exist. Yes, if Kiki was really in that factory, he didn't need to continue being led by the nose by the other party. He could be one step ahead of the other party and sneak in first to save Kiki. But the problem was Kiki really in that factory? What if his judgment was wrong? What if this terrifying coincidence was just a coincidence? Following the other party's instructions or following his own dream was a very difficult choice. Poplar Fruit closed his eyes and breathed heavily. He couldn't drag this out any longer. He had to make a decision. At 4:20 in the morning, the sky was already turning white, and there were signs of dawn in the gray sky. A cool breeze blew through the forest, causing the leaves to rustle. However, it was somber and quiet. Only the red soil that had already spread out on the ground carried a trace of the unpleasant smell of blood. Swoosh! Poplar Fruit sheathed his sword. His eyes became firm. Clearly, he had switched to a rational way of thinking. He had made his choice. Chapter 1366. Swoosh! 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 The sound from afar made a weasel that had just poked its head out of a crack shrink back. The sound of leaves breaking was not loud. The humidity in the tropical rainforest was very high at this time. Even thick shoes felt wet and a little heavy, as if they had not been completely dried after being washed. Poplar Fruit did not care. He pulled the 2 boxes of money and rolled over them. Along the way, he chose to walk in the more hidden woods, avoiding the valleys and paths that were easy to be discovered. Fortunately, he did not meet anyone. He only saw a Burmese python from afar. This one was much bigger than the ones O'Shimin had seen. Its body was as thick as a bucket, and it was enough to swallow an adult like Poplar Fruit in one bite. Of course, because of Poplar Fruit's vigilance and the distance between them, they passed by peacefully. They had been walking for about an hour. During this time, Poplar Fruit had used the seized Noji 1050 to send a message to the bandits in exchange for the same location. Poplar Fruit gradually understood why the bandits were doing this. They wanted to exhaust Poplar Fruit so that he could not display his terrifying skills. Of course, Poplar Fruit did not follow their instructions. In his mind, he used the memory of the previous dream to construct a rough route, correcting it as he walked. But the deeper he went, the more frightened Poplar Fruit was. It was exactly the same as the forest in the dream. If he continued walking like this, in less than 15 minutes, he would be able to come into contact with the factory where Kiki was imprisoned in the dream. Of course, Poplar Fruit also believed in his premonition more and more. It was too magical, too mysterious, and could not be explained. Then, he did not need to think about it. He just needed to follow the directions of his premonition. There was still 1 kilometer to go. Poplar Fruit found that there were more and more traces of human footsteps in front of him. He even saw traces of wheels. Slowing down and hiding the 2 boxes of cash, Poplar Fruit quietly crept up a small hill and crawled his head out. Poplar Fruit immediately burst into tears. There was actually a dilapidated factory in the small valley in front of him. The layout of the factory was exactly the same as the one in Poplar Fruit's dream. The factory had been closed for a long time, but Poplar Fruit guessed that since it could be built in such a remote place, it should be an arsenal of the early Burmese warlords, and then it was occupied by these guys as their headquarters. But who cares what it used to be? Poplar Fruit only knew that Kiki must be here. That's right, it must be here. Poplar Fruit was 100% sure that the Jade Emperor or Guanyin Bodhisattva had given him that dream. Somehow, they had given him a clear path to save his daughter. If everything goes well, I must personally take Kiki to the temple and burn incense for the Buddha. Oh, and the Taoist temple. Poplar Fruit thought in confusion. No, I can't be too excited. I have to calm down. Poplar Fruit's eyes became cold again. He had to maintain a high level of calmness in order to save his daughter safely. Of course, before that, Poplar Fruit took a few photos and sent them to He Wonjua with his mobile phone. Because it was a cross-border, they couldn't track the number that Poplar Fruit had given them. Big Brother, he, and the others were his only 3 reinforcements, and he needed their help. Okay, I'll be there soon. It will take an hour. He Wonjua sent a message. He had Poplar Fruit's location, so he could quickly find Poplar Fruit. Don't act alone. All right, we have more reinforcements, but they will be slower. It will take an hour and a half. He Wonjua's reinforcements should be the special forces from Shu-Du military region. However, Poplar Fruit frowned. He looked closely at the 1 hour that Big Brother he had mentioned. It was already past 5 o'clock. In another hour, it would be past 6 o'clock, almost 7 o'clock. What about half an hour later? If 5 o'clock was considered the time when people wanted to sleep in, then 6 o'clock, or even 7 o'clock, Poplar Fruit believed that these bandits, who were often active in the mountains, wouldn't be sleeping like the night owls in the city. Most of them must have woken up. No, I can't wait like this. Poplar Fruit knew his daughter's location. He even knew the factory very well. He had checked it inside and out yesterday. He had to rush to his daughter's side before the bandits woke up. Even if they couldn't break through the encirclement, Kiki wouldn't be in danger with his protection. Then, he would delay until Big Brother he and the others arrived. With a pincer attack, he would be able to eliminate all the bandits in the most effective way. Of course, regardless of whether they were eliminated or not, safely rescuing Kiki was the first priority. After making up his mind, Poplar Fruit sent another text message to the other party. Then, he received a text message about the new location of the fake handover. Poplar Fruit suddenly had a feeling that this might be the last time he was tormenting him. There wasn't much time left for him. Poplar Fruit had to act immediately. He couldn't care less about Big Brother he's text message. Poplar Fruit returned to the place where he hid the money box. He took off the 2 Meow Dao and crossed the scabbards on his back. Of course, Poplar Fruit only took out one of the Meow Dao, and the other was still in the scabbard. He didn't wrap a piece of cloth around his hand and tie his hand to the knife like in the movies. There was no need for that. What Poplar Fruit needed was flexibility. He also took out the pistol from his calf, put on the silencer, loaded the gun, and held it in his right hand. A knife in his left hand and a pistol in his right. This wasn't a good combination, but Poplar Fruit was good at using knives with both hands. His left hand wasn't as good at using a gun as his right hand, so he could only hold it like this. He put both phones on silent and turned off vibration mode before he put them in his jacket pocket. Poplar Fruit had to make sure nothing went wrong. Poplar Fruit hid the 2 suitcases containing the money in a duffel bag among a pile of boulders next to the factory wall. He had made a small backup plan here, just in case. Surprisingly, although it was already half dawn and most people were still asleep, there were still some of these dangerous criminals patrolling the high towers and rooftops with guns. Of course, there weren't many of them, only about 5 or 6. After a night of peace, these people let down their guard. Some were dozing off, some were chatting in relief, and some were even playing games on their phones. Poplar Fruit easily bypassed these guards. He didn't intend to touch them, because these guards were in the open. If they suddenly disappeared, it would easily expose Poplar Fruit's invasion plan. Poplar Fruit had even made up his mind that unless it was absolutely necessary, Poplar Fruit wouldn't easily make a move. Everything was to sneak to Kiki's side, protect her, and even secretly rescue her. These criminals probably didn't expect that someone would know the structure of their base better than they did. Furthermore, someone had quietly climbed over the wall right under their noses and snuck into the exhaust duct of the factory through a small door. Chapter 1367. There was one bad thing about a tropical rainforest. Once the rainy season arrived, the humidity would be off the charts. In places with poor ventilation, don't even talk about washing clean clothes. Just casually wiping the walls would leave a watermark on one's hand. Husin woke up very early today. It wasn't that he didn't want to sleep, but it was too uncomfortable to sleep. It was as if he was lying on a quilt that was fished out from the water. As he cursed, Husin stretched his body. His skinny body did not even have any muscles. let alone abdominal muscles. It made people feel terrified just by looking at him. He swaggered out with his gun and prepared to go outside to bask in the sun. Wait until I get a large sum of money from that rich man, then I can get $1,800,000 to buy a house in the city and buy 2 women. I don't have to stay in this corner anymore. Damn it. If I stay here, I'll be tortured to death. With such a happy thought, not only Hussein, but everyone in the team was fantasizing about getting enough money from poplar fruit for a lifetime. Even if each person got $1 million, in Myanmar, $1 million was enough to make them a millionaire. Then why would they still want to risk their lives here? That girl is really pretty. Hussein thought enviously, but unfortunately, she's too young. She's pretty but useless. When I get money in the future, I'll buy a mother and a daughter. I'll raise the younger one and continue to be my wife. He smiled evilly as he used his little finger to dig his nose. He carried his rifle like he was carrying a hoe. It was as if he was really carrying a hoe and going around to dig up the walls of those good people's homes. Pack, 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 pack. The footsteps of Hussein's slippers became clearer and clearer in the long corridor. Poplar Fruit frowned. He was hiding in a dent in the metal door of the corridor. He was trying his best to suck in his lower abdomen and stick his whole body to the metal door. This was the only way to ensure that he wouldn't be seen. In the end, he was still inexperienced. If it was a special forces soldier like Big Brother, he who sneaked in, they would definitely be able to quietly hide all of these motley crew in their beds. Unlike him, who had just come out of the vent and almost bumped into a guy who had just come out of a room. You said you were at 5 o'clock. Why didn't you sleep? Why did you come out for a walk? Poplar Fruit was a little depressed, but from the looks of it, the other party was getting closer and closer, and he had nowhere to hide. A close combat with the other party was unavoidable. He wasn't afraid of Poplar Fruit, but he needed to consider whether to use a knife or a gun. The Meow Dao was too long, and it was not easy to use in a small space. The gun had its drawbacks as well. Although it was equipped with a silencer, if the bullet passed through and hit the wall, there would probably still be a sound. However, regardless of whether it was a knife or a spear, there was a drawback to using it in a place where people would definitely pass by. It was easy to leave behind bloodstains. Yang was mind-spun like lightning, and he suddenly had an idea. The shirtless Hussein swaggered past. He was very calm because the headquarters was very safe. As long as they didn't provoke the big boss, they could always live well. Suddenly, Hussein felt a chill run down his spine. His slow brain finally managed to process the effect brought about by the corner of his eyes. A second ago, he had walked past a place, and there was a person coldly looking at him from the side. Alone? Before Hussein had the time to think about what this meant, he had already experienced the consequences. An arm suddenly stretched out from the side. He subconsciously opened his mouth, but his mouth and nose were covered by another hand. Ugh! Hussein's thoughts were already in a mess. Suddenly, he felt a huge force acting on his face. Following a ka-ka sound and a sharp pain, Hussein saw his but for the last time before he was swallowed by the darkness. What the hell? Poplar Fruit didn't care what Hussein was thinking about. He still maintained his posture of supporting Hussein, and with a hook of his long leg, he picked up the rifle that Hussein had dropped. Only then did it not cause any abnormal noise. Phew! Poplar Fruit secretly took a breath. He was also very nervous. This assassination was different from dealing with Naboo. In the heart of the bandits, it was too difficult to deal with the enemy without making any noise. After taking back the knife that he had secretly placed beside him, Poplar Fruit dragged Hussein back to his room and stuffed him under the blanket, pretending that he was sleeping soundly. He had to go to the 3rd floor. Poplar Fruit knew his daughter's location. He still had 2 more floors to go. It was very convenient to take the stairs, but the possibility of being exposed was very high. Poplar Fruit had already heard some people moving around. It seemed like he had to be even more careful. It was not impossible to be afraid of the outer walls, but Poplar Fruit didn't want to wait too long. He needed to use some of the hidden vertical stairs that he had explored in his dream to climb up. However, it wasn't really hidden. Although Poplar Fruit was very careful, when he climbed up to the 2nd floor, he saw a short man in his underwear walking out while yawning. He really met someone at the corner. Even Poplar Fruit was caught off guard. He opened his eyes wide, and his sharp gaze directly met the confused and frightened eyes of the other party. Without any time to think, Poplar Fruit raised the Meow Dao in his left hand and rushed forward. The bright silver blade flashed, and the man also felt his vision blur. The blade had already pierced through his throat and came out from the back of his neck. It wasn't known if he could feel pain, but Poplar Fruit's movements were too fast. He simply didn't give the other party a chance to react and directly pushed him back into the room. Gurgle, gurgle. Two weak sounds. He couldn't shout because his throat had already been cut. With a tremble, the short man's head drooped and he stopped breathing. But Poplar Fruit didn't have a chance to catch his breath. His scalp was somewhat numb because although he had pushed the man back, Poplar Fruit discovered that he had practically jumped into a den of thieves. 1, 2, 3. Including the one he had already killed, there were actually 4 people living in this room. The other 3 were staring dumbfoundedly at their companion, who had just walked out, being pushed back with a knife in his back. Poplar Fruit's reaction was half a second faster than the other party's. When one of them trembled and reached for a gun hanging on the wall, Poplar Fruit's right hand swiped at his waist, and a black pistol appeared in his hand. A hole exploded in the head of the man who had reached for the gun, and he fell diagonally onto the bed. The other 2 were so frightened that they trembled and raised their hands. One of them hurriedly opened his mouth. Don't. But how could Poplar Fruit show mercy? He coldly raised his hand and fired 2 more shots. He didn't even need to aim, and just waved his arm in a willful manner. Similarly, 2 people fell backward. In the middle of their foreheads, 2 brand new bloody holes were dripping with dark red blood. Fortunately, it was a pistol with a silencer. Although there was still a bit of sound, it only stayed in this room and didn't spread out. Poplar Fruit's massacre here was a little merciless. Even he himself felt a little strange. It was true that he was calm, but the madness of hatred was sprouting in his heart. Saving Kiki was still the first priority, but the second priority had quietly changed to revenge. It's not enough. They haven't given enough. It's far from enough to make up for the shock and harm my daughter has suffered. You're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.